starting off with someone dropping lore about a guy whose name alone gets people's blood pressure spiking, painting him as an unhinged sword master who spent his whole life locked in a room acting out of his mind. The disgraced firstborn of Count Perdium, someone everyone written off as a complete waste of noble blood. And this blood-soaked bozo from the northern frontier cannot even handle the hit to his ego, screaming his lungs out because he just got his whole career ended by a guy he used to talk trash about. While the guy in the hooded cloak stands in the middle of a burning Hell's Cape bragging about how much cash he dropped just to set up this death trap, holding a massive battle axe like he's the final boss of a Souls-like game, with a glowing eye peeking through his visor just to flex on a dying opponent, which completely breaks this northern knight's brain, realizing his entire operational strategy was leaked before he even stepped on the field, because every single troop movement, every division, and every reserve squad, along with every rat inside their spy network, had already been tracked down and accounted for weeks in advance, shattering their hidden layers like a cheap toy, leaving them with zero counterplay from minute one, leaving this white-bearded fraud shaking in his boots because he really thought he was the secret trump card. And before this washed-up old head can finish his angry villain speech, a boot stomps right into his teeth.
Yeah! Kill that boy! Shut up! Yeah! Yeah! Kill that boy! Yes!
Putting an immediate end to the chatter, because when you lose the war, you do not get to drop commentary. As a dark helmet clatters against the dirt, establishing the golden rule of this entire timeline, that no matter how many times these factions try to push up, Ghislain holds the entire cheat code manual in his head. Now, rewinding the clock back 1 year to a dreary military outpost in the Latania Kingdom, where a man abruptly snaps awake on a cot, breathing like his lungs are on fire, clutching at his neck in total disorientation, expecting to find a gaping wound and pooled blood, because his mental timeline is still stuck on the moment a blade chopped straight through his throat, the kinetic shock of a lethal strike still ringing inside his skull, from when he was caught in that final, desperate standoff on a corpse-covered hill, bleeding out from a fatal chest gash while his armor fell to pieces, getting torn apart by an attack that should have wiped his existence off the continent, where Aiden, one of the top 7 strongest swordsmen on the land, stood over him in polished gold plate gear talking about how the Mercenary King's run was officially finished, asking for his final statements with the smirkiest face you will ever see on a high-tier knight, only for Ghislain to spit purely unadulterated hatred, furious that his lifelong vendetta against the nobles was cut short, prompting Aiden to casually drop personal family trauma like it was gossip, bringing up how Ghislain bailed on his county after his sister passed away, which completely freezes Ghislain, because an enemy commander from a foreign realm should not know a single detail about his domestic family history, until Aiden reveals that Duke Delphine was not working alone, dropping the bombshell that a secret syndicate coordinated the downfall of House Perdium, exposing that an entire coalition of shadowy conspirators pulled the strings behind the scenes, leaving Ghislain surrounded by the silent realization that his revenge was directed at the wrong target all along. And as the blade presses tight against his windpipe, he roars in helpless frustration, getting a deadpan 2-letter reply before the sword drops, slicing downwards to sever his neck in one fluid motion, which should have been the permanent end of his story, yet here he is staring at a wooden ceiling, feeling his throat completely intact and realizing his hands have shrunk back to their teenage form, immediately jumping to the conclusion that foreign mages captured him for dark experiments, until a voice calls out from the tent entrance, revealing Ricardo, a simple county guard who definitely does not look like a dark magic researcher, and Ghislain instantly slides behind him with a cold steel edge against his collarbone, giving him the full Mercenary King stare like he's about to collect a bounty, which leaves Ricardo looking like a man whose boss lost his mind over a simple wake-up call, explaining that Ghislain just cried himself to sleep after throwing a childish tantrum, reminding him that he was throwing a fit about wanting to command the local orc raid squad, a detail that hits Ghislain hard as Ricardo packs up the travel gear, casual as ever, mentioning that their destination is the home territory of House Perdium, a name that instantly snaps Ghislain out of his combat stance, grabbing Ricardo by the tunic like he just heard an impossible ghost story, because in his memory, that county was turned into burnt ash decades ago. Yet as he steps out onto the cliff edge, the castle stands proud over a thriving, peaceful valley, proving that the catastrophic war that wiped out his lineage has not even started yet. And after pinching his own face hard enough to bruise, the physical pain confirms the truth, staring down at his unblemished, youthful reflection mirrored against the living territory, as the invisible gears of time lock back into place, confirming that he has regressed straight back into his teenage years, back when he was still an insecure kid throwing fits because he felt inferior next to his peers, which eventually drove him to run away from his family out of sheer shame, leading to decades of brutal mercenary work where he carved his path through mountains of fallen foes to reach the top, only to return home too late, finding his sister dead and his ancestral home turned to dust. But right now, that horrifying future of total loss is completely erased, and the Black Wolf flag of House Perdium flies unbroken in the morning wind, giving him a second chance so overwhelming he can barely keep his eyes dry, until his combat instincts instantly cut through the emotion, remembering today's exact date. Cursed day his original raid squad got wiped out, because Scout intelligence reported only 3 minor orcs wandering near the border, when in reality over 20 bloodthirsty beasts were waiting in ambush, slaughtering everyone due to his own teenage stubbornness. So he needs to take command immediately, even if every soldier here thinks he's just a useless noble. And suddenly, a massive shadow covers the sky above the encampment, as a heavy wooden barricade gets smashed into splinters, sending the entire front line into immediate panic, as red-skinned monsters tear through chainmail before anyone can draw a blade, catching Ghislain off guard, realizing the ambush timing has shifted faster than before, with giant war clubs crushing armor and turning the defense line into a total disaster zone, sending men flying like ragdolls as the monsters roar for complete annihilation, while Raid Commander Skoven charges forward trying to stabilize his broken ranks, only to take a heavy blow straight to the chest armor, realizing in terror that the scout reports were completely wrong and everyone is about to die. Right as a towering red executioner lifts a massive axe directly over his head, and before that axe can slice Skoven in two, a body violently slams into the commander, shoving him out of the death zone, as Ghislain cuts straight through the wind with zero hesitation, closing the gap on a monster 3 times his weight class, relying purely on raw physical muscle memory without a single drop of mana, and delivering a high-speed stroke that cuts clean through flesh and bone, leaving the entire squad staring in dead silence as the useless young noble drops an elite monster in 1 second. And the red beast collapses like a sack of bricks into the dirt, complaining internally that his current teenage body lacks open mana channels, making that kill harder than it should have been, before turning his gaze straight down at the wounded commander sitting in the dust, reaching out an open palm with zero respect for military hierarchy, demanding the operational authority badge right then and there, looking down with the calm confidence of a mercenary king who is about to turn this disaster into a total tactical walkover, standing right over a bleeding commander on a smoky battlefield, holding out an open hand like he's asking for spare change, except he's deadass demanding full operational authority, which sends Skoven into a complete mental freeze, because who in their right mind surrenders a whole battalion to a teenager known for throwing temper tantrums? So the commander pushes himself off the dirt, barking that military rank isn't a toy you hand out to unproven nobles, while Ghislain just stands there silently getting annoyed, until a massive red orc suddenly breaches the perimeter, swinging a battle axe the size of a dinner table right toward the front line, prompting Skoven to lunge forward with his sword raised, shouting at the kid to stay back and let the real soldiers die in peace. Only for Ghislain's eyes to flash with a sharp blue focus, realizing talking to this duty-bound idiot is a complete waste of precious tactical seconds. So he moves before Skoven can even plant his back foot, grabbing the commander's heavy armor collar and yanking him backward out of the swing path, leaving Skoven staggering back in sheer confusion as he tries to process how a skinny noble boy just threw him around like a rag doll. Right as Ghislain drives a longsword straight through the skull of the charging red beast, pinning its brain to its spine before it can even roar, the monster collapsing into the dirt like a felled tree, completely dead before its body even registers the impact, leaving Skoven staring in frozen terror at the blade sticking out of the monster's forehead, unable to comprehend how a manaless strike hit the exact micro-vulnerability. So Ghislain turns around with zero wind in his lungs, casually asking the commander if he actually understands the single, most important rule in battlefield survival, pointing out that when troops are paralyzed by sheer terror, no amount of plate armor or formation training will keep them from getting butchered, before flashing a cold, arrogant smirk that screams he is about to single-handedly flip the entire squad's morale from bottom-tier fodder to aggressive menace, leaping straight off the ridge and impaling another red beast downward, planting his boots into its ribcage with dirty leverage, hoisting his blade high above his head with perfect center-of-mass balance, surrounded by flying gravel and monster blood, while the rest of the surviving raid squad holds their shield line below, completely paralyzed as the red horde swarms the open lane, and Ghislain mounts the lead monster like a trophy, driving his steel straight down into its brain stem while the frontline extras watch in utter shock, looking down at the surrounding beasts with deadpan disrespect, telling the whole mob to step up if they actually want a real fight. Holding a blade dripping with dark monster grease, his face half-shadowed like a seasoned war criminal back in his prime element, standing tall on top of a freshly slaughtered orc corpse, shouting across the entire canyon that he will personally wipe every single one of them out, and plunging directly into the center of the swarm, relying entirely on micro-angles and weight distribution instead of fancy magic, slicing clean through a monster's limb with zero wasted motion, making Skoven question if he's actively hallucinating from blood loss. Because even as a trained mana user, the commander knows how brutal these red beasts are, yet this unformed kid is dismantling them like farm equipment. Even though Ghislain's current teenage lungs are burning like he just ran a marathon on zero sleep, he refuses to slow down his tempo, dodging massive overhead swings by mere millimeters, using the monster's own momentum to slide right into their blind spots, flashing a dark spectral phantom behind his back that mirrors his mercenary king aura from his past life, taunting the horde at the top of his lungs, telling them they are a complete embarrassment to their entire warrior lineage, which successfully angers every red beast on the field, forcing the entire mob to abandon the defensive line and sprint directly at him, causing the background extras to scream in panic, thinking the young master just lost his mind and started running for his life. While Skoven watches from behind, his military brain desperately trying to calculate why Ghislain is drawing all aggro in one specific direction, realizing the idiot boy isn't retreating at all, but sprinting full speed straight toward a 200-foot cliff edge, the sheer tactical genius of the setup suddenly clicking in Skoven's head as his eyes go wide in realization. barking orders at his men to assemble a tight phalanx formation and move behind the young master's path immediately, screaming for the whole squad to follow the first son's lead before the opportunity disappears. As 20 heavy red orcs charge blindly across the dirt, completely unaware they are sprinting into a total funnel trap. While Ghislain glances over his shoulder, knowing his garbage stamina can't handle slicing 20 more monsters in a straight melee, he sets up the ultimate environmental play, trusting that Skoven isn't stupid enough to miss the handoff, leading the heavy beast directly over the crest of the rocky ridge without slowing down his stride. And right as the lead orcs realize they ran out of ground, their eyes pop in delayed panic, because Skoven's shield wall slams right into their rear formation with maximum forward momentum, while Ghislain flashes one last smug grin, whispering that the trap is officially sprung, and dives backward into empty air, falling straight down the face of the sheer cliff. As Skoven roars at the top of his lungs for his troops to drive their heavy iron forward, the full shield line shoving with everything they have, turning the red orcs' massive weight against them at the edge, and pushing the entire mob straight off the precipice with a massive collective groan, sending 20 elite monsters flailing helplessly through the air like sacks of dirt, screaming as they plummet down the vertical rock wall with zero leverage to stop their fall, crashing into the hard stone floor below in a massive shower of dust, rocks, and crushed bones, leaving the surviving soldiers gasping for air on the ledge, completely stunned that they just survived a guaranteed squad wipe, while Skoven sprints straight to the cliff edge, shouting for the young master down below, finding Ghislain dangling from the rock wall by a single sword impaled into the stone, looking up with a weak smirk. The commander desperately reaching over the ledge, telling the kid to grab his hand before his grip gives out. But Ghislain's blood-slicked fingers lose their friction on the metal guard, completely exhausted from pushing his young body past its limit, and his fingers slip entirely, sending him falling backward into the dark abyss, while Skoven reaches out screaming in sheer panic. The commander's face twisting in absolute horror as he watches his lord's oldest son disappear into the fog, everything fading into a pitch-black void as Ghislain's consciousness completely shuts down from physical trauma, until a faint, familiar voice starts echoing through the dark space, calling out his name with gentle warmth. Opening his eyes inside his own subconscious dreamscape, whispering his sister's name in total disbelief. Shattered memory fragments floating past his eyes, showing young Elena weeping after their mother passed away, then smiling softly, and finally yelling at his immature behavior. Her distant voice scolding him for being the absolute worst brother, while Ghislain stands alone in the abyss staring at his unblemished hands, realizing these are the lingering regrets of the sister he failed to protect in his original timeline. When a crying vision of young Elena suddenly grabs his shoulder, begging him not to leave her behind again, causing Ghislain to gasp violently awake inside a soft bed, a wet rag slipping off his sweating forehead. Staring up at the wooden ceiling of his room inside the intact Perdium estate, holding out a hand to verify he is still breathing. Sitting up in bed with a sudden wave of intense body pain, groaning as his muscles burn from severe overexertion. Holding his stomach while reflecting that physical agony is a pretty small price to pay for being alive. Right as the bedroom door swings wide open, and an SSS tier made with silver hair and red tips walks in holding a water bucket. Ghislain staring at her with wide eyes, muttering her name like he's looking at a ghost. And before Belinda can even finish scolding him for reckless behavior, Ghislain lunges out of bed and pulls her into a tight, desperate embrace, leaving the top tier maid flustered and confused, asking if she did something wrong while he just whispers how relieved he is to see her. Recaffacing his past life memories where Belinda was his personal tutor who stayed loyal through all his bratty tantrums, only to vanish forever when the estate fell. Realizing that holding her alive in his arms is proof that he actually has a second chance, so he resolves to tell her about the coming disaster, grabbing her shoulders with a deadly serious expression, warning her that House Perdium is about to face total destruction, confessing straight to her face that he literally died in the future and came back to his youth, only for Belinda to giggle dismissively, treating his warning like another childish game and teasing him about the orcs nearly scrambling his brain. Realizing that telling people you regressed sounds completely unhinged to anyone without future knowledge. As Belinda sighs, asking him what he planned to do about the upcoming estate festival if he stayed bedridden, pointing to a framed photo on the desk, teasing that Lady Elena has been waiting for him to take her to the festival so they can fix their distant relationship, which triggers a dark memory in Ghislain's head, remembering how his past self locked himself away in isolation during that exact same festival. So he turns to Belinda and asks for the precise date, to which she casually replies that he has about 1 week left. The word week, hitting Ghislain like a ton of bricks as an old memory flashes back of a door creaking open, showing a young, crying Elena standing in his doorway, desperately begging him to go to the festival with her. And the horrific realization sets in, because in his original timeline, exactly 1 week after that festival, his sister Elena was murdered. Ghislain doesn't even bother explaining himself, grabbing his younger sister Elena into a tight, desperate embrace, which sends the maid next to her into full panic mode, shouting at him for pulling such a weird prank, while Ghislain just buries his face in Elena's shoulder, softly whispering that he missed her, only for Elena to violently push him off, yelling that he's creeping her out as he stumbles back coughing from her surprising child strength. And she immediately starts scolding him, asking what kind of twisted game he's playing by acting nice now, throwing his own past words right back in his face, reminding him how he used to tell her to piss off because her breath disgusted him, which causes Ghislain to freeze in genuine remorse, rubbing his neck and dropping a quiet apology that leaves both girls stunned. And as he tries to insist he actually defeated the orc squad without getting hit in the head, his battered body immediately betrays him, collapsing straight onto his knees while Elena mockingly sighs that he clearly came back unconscious, clutching his abdomen on the floor as his internal organs scream from the sheer physical strain. Yet looking up with a calm, knowing smile, realizing that everyone in this castle is exactly how he remembered them. And a dark memory resurfaces of his past life, where he bitterly rejected Elena's offer to attend the festival together, which turned out to be the fatal mistake of his life, because her body was later discovered mutilated near the slums. So Ghislain grips his shirt in agonizing regret, swearing on his soul that he will never leave her side this time. And after getting himself off the floor, he follows Elena down the hallway, knocking on a room door right before two guards burst out, revealing bodyguards Jamal and Philip, who bow and explain that the servants asked Elena to oversee festival supplies, raising Ghislain's suspicions about why a noble lady is handling manual labor, only for the maid to roast him for lazing around during a workforce shortage. So Ghislain realizes how clueless he was about estate logistics back then, surprising everyone by volunteering to help with the workload, causing the bodyguards to head out while Elena stops dead in her tracks, staring up at her brother, her, and the maid looking at him like he lost his mind, looking like my ex when my card declined at Denny's after promising her the world. And down in the bustling marketplace, workers are swarming everywhere to set up wooden stalls for the event, where Elena physically grabs Ghislain and yells at him to get lost before he frightens the staff with his terrible reputation, forcing Ghislain to step back and analyze the tactical reality that Elena was lured to the slums, meaning he needs to master the castle layout. When suddenly, heavy footsteps echo across the stone plaza as an armored figure comes sprinting toward them, revealing Old Man Fergus, a veteran knight panting heavily while wiping sweat off his face in relief, who immediately checks on Ghislain after hearing the orc raid news, though Ghislain brushes the topic aside. As Belinda steps up teasingly, telling Fergus to drag Ghislain back to his room, while Ghislain curses his reputation for standing in his way. So he cuts through the noise, ordering Fergus to take him straight to the castle's abandoned training grounds, stating deadpan that he needs to train, leaving the old knight looking like he just saw a ghost. And Fergus leads him through the estate grounds to a massive, imposing stone facility, where Ghislain steps inside, his eyes widening in complete disbelief at the fact that the circular training hall is spotless, pristine, and perfectly maintained. Walking past racks of clean weapons as Fergus softly explains they kept the facility ready just in case he ever decided to use it, reassuring the young lord that whatever dark phase he's going through will pass. Which hits Ghislain hard, realizing Fergus maintained this hall for him in his past life too, without ever receiving a single word of thanks. So Ghislain places a hand on the knight's shoulder, muttering that dying feels terrible and he plans on living a long life, bragging that he actually died and came back from the future, which Fergus instantly dismisses as childish tomfoolery. And as Fergus steps outside, Ghislain reflects on how his past self treated every loyal retainer like an enemy out of pure insecurity, remembering their warm smiles from his memories before locking in, knowing he only has 1 week to build real power, recalling that in his previous timeline, a neighboring lord was framed for Elena's murder, which triggered the catastrophic regional war that ultimately burned House Perdium to the ground, meaning Elena's death was the exact domino that collapsed his entire family's legacy. So he stares forward with glowing eyes, deciding to forge his weak teenage body into a weapon, sitting cross-legged in the center of the hall to begin manipulating internal mana, drawing in the blue particles floating in the room, something he mastered doing even on blood-soaked battlefields, visualizing the scattered atmospheric mana as interconnected threads of raw energy, cupping his hands to condense and bundle the light like spinning thread onto a spool, forming a baseline mana core effortlessly, though he knows a standard core won't be enough to fight continental threats, recalling the forbidden method from a half-burned magic grimoire he scavenged in his past life, forcing a second and third mana core to condense simultaneously along his torso, straining his underdeveloped veins to link the 3 cores into a high-output energy mesh, triggering a violent red explosion of power that ruptures his internal pressure points, collapsing onto the stone floor while coughing up blood, realizing 3 cores is his young body's absolute limit, wiping his bloody mouth while acknowledging that this multi-core technique burns massive mana rapidly, which was the exact vulnerability Aiden exploited in his past life by overwhelming him with an entire night order when he was drained. So Ghislain stands back up in the empty hall, vowing to take Aiden's head while his enemy sits oblivious on a dark throne, remembering the shadowy syndicate lurking behind Duke Delphine who orchestrated his home's destruction, and his eyes flare with pure rage, declaring that he will dismantle every single one of them. Fast-forwarding 7 days later to the official night of the estate festival, where Ghislain tightens his leather belt, snaps a pouch onto his hip, and steps into the vibrant castle town, walking down the paved street until Elena spots him, her jaw dropping in complete shock, asking why he actually showed up when he never attends events, to which he calmly replies that a noble should support his people, while she skeptically notes he's done nothing but lock himself in the training hall for an entire week, teasing him about how he used to complain about their father before offering a genuine smile and admitting she likes the change, looking up at him affectionately, noting it feels like her real brother finally came back, while Ghislain keeps his composure, analyzing his progress over the past 7 days, realizing that while his altered choices are shifting minor details, the broader historical timeline remains active like a complex tactical chessboard, meaning he has to stay sharp and adapt to every microchange to keep his future advantage. Mentally calculating his next move like a grandmaster placing a winning piece, he double-checks the gear at his waist while buying festival bread alongside Elena, holding his sister's hand as they walk through the crowded night market under the stars. And as Elena stretches on the stone staircase complaining that the festival is boring, Ghislain realizes no attack has happened because he's been guarding her. So he decides to bait out the hidden threat, suggesting they explore the darker, isolated event grounds nearby, which brightens Elena up instantly, grabbing his hand and pulling him along to see the new attractions. And as they step into the shadows, Ghislain's eyes narrow into a deadly, cold glare, catching bodyguards Jamal and Philip red-handed in the dark, lurking over a restrained Belinda with smug villainous grins. In his past life, Ghislain grew up believing Jamal and Philip were loyal martyrs who died valiantly defending his sister, since House Perdium's official records praised them as trusted protectors who fell in the slums. Which makes staring at them right now hit with cold reality, his glowing eye locking onto the very men who betrayed his family, and pointing them out in front of everyone, explicitly exposing them as the inside traitors behind the entire estate collapse. Moments earlier, Jamal was eagerly leading Elena down a narrow cobblestone corridor under the pretense of showing her a special festival event, only for Elena to look around this desolate, crate-filled alleyway and immediately question why anyone would host a performance in a place full of trash. And while Jamal stammers out a weak excuse about the organizers still setting up, Ghislain isn't listening to his lies because he's analyzing the environment, noticing how every wooden crate and barrel has been positioned with tactical intent to block off every clear escape route. So the moment Elena turns on her heel to leave, Jamal panics and tries to convince her to stay inside the trap, which forces Philip to drop his respectful guard routine entirely, forcefully grabbing Belinda across the cobblestones, giving her a look so sinister that Belinda realizes the men who guarded her for years are no longer pretending to be allies, leaving her struggling against his iron grip while trying to process how the family's trusted security detail turned into kidnappers. And instead of backing down, Philip coldly tells her to sit tight and wait, rubbing his armored gauntlets together with a dark grin as he explains that a very lucrative request just came in for her head. Elena's face completely freezes in shock, realizing she was walked straight into an ambush by her own bodyguards, right as heavy footsteps echo from the alley entrance, signaling that the buyers have arrived to complete the transfer, revealing Frank walking forward in dark sunglasses and a long trench coat alongside two syndicate mercenaries, praising the guards for keeping the operation quiet and preparing to finalize the deal for the young lady, until his dark lenses focus on Ghislain standing beside her, causing him to pause because a noble heir wasn't part of the original hit contract. But Jamal just smirks and offers to throw Ghislain in as a free bonus target, prompting Ghislain to step firmly between Belinda and the traitors, confronting the man who watched him grow up, only for Jamal to mock him, claiming he's tired of guarding an impoverished territory tormented by barbarians, and that running away with blood money is just smart planning since House Perdium is destined to collapse anyway. A sentence he doesn't even get to finish before Ghislain's blade runs straight through his heart, shutting down his retirement speech instantly, leaving Jamal choking on his own blood while Philip stands frozen in disbelief, unable to process how an untrained teenage noble just dropped a veteran knight in one move. As Ghislain coldly reminds him that while the old estate was broke, the true men of House Perdium never sold out their loyalty. And as blue mana sparks in Ghislain's eye, Philip loses his composure, screaming about how a knight could lose to an amateur, which ends up being his final thought, because before he can even raise his weapon, Ghislain drives his longsword straight through Philip's skull, dropping him onto the cobblestones right beside his dead partner, which stuns the two hooded assassins watching from the back, who start whispering in shock because this kid was supposed to be a helpless brat with zero combat training, leaving Frank to analyze the scene in silence, recognizing that even if the guards were caught off guard, taking out two armored knights in 4 seconds requires high-density mana output. And as young Elena clutches his shirt in tears, traumatized by the sudden bloody violence, Ghislain looks down at her, knowing he cannot let her innocent memory be stained by the rest of the execution. So he smoothly taps her neck pressure point to send her into a safe sleep, laying her down gently on the cobblestones away from the bloodstains, giving Frank the opening to step forward and mockingly thank Ghislain for saving them the trouble of killing the two traitors themselves, puffing smoke from his pipe while asking if the young lord was hiding his true martial skills all along, a question Ghislain completely ignores as he flicks the blood off his blade, mentally calculating that while the two hooded extras are minor threats, the man in the middle possesses a far higher tier of energy. And when Frank flares his blue aura, the entire alleyway fills with heavy pressure, confirming he is an experienced syndicate killer who needs to be eliminated fast before Ghislain's unconditioned body gives out. So Ghislain channels blue mana down his right arm, asking Frank point-blank who paid for this abduction, only for Frank to dismiss the question, stating that a dead man has no need for strategic details, prompting his subordinate to step up and ask if they should just sever Ghislain's head on the spot. But Frank vetoes it, ordering his men to capture him alive and break every limb in his body so he goes mad from the pain. And with a cruel smirk on his face, the two hooded subordinates draw their steel and rush across the alleyway at full speed, which is where Ghislain's preparation pays off, reaching into the waist pouch he equipped before entering the festival grounds, and hurling a cylindrical blue firecracker straight through the air toward the lead assailant's face. leaving the guy flinching in confusion as he realizes mid-stride that an explosive device is flying directly into his vision, which detonates in a blinding flash of heat and sparks, shattering his forward momentum, allowing Ghislain to close the distance while the blinded mercenary roars about cheap tricks. And as their swords collide in a cloud of sparks, Ghislain uses spatial edge alignment to completely bypass the guy's guard, executing a wide mana-infused arc that overwhelms the assailant's defensive posture, and driving his blade straight into the center of the mercenary's chest, ripping the purple glowing steel free as blood splatters across the stones, dropping the first extra before he can even adjust, just in time to sense Frank surging through the smoke from his blind spot, swinging a lethal blade directly at his neck, which Ghislain intercepts by crossing his sword in a split-second block that leaves Frank staring in shock, because blocking a full-power sneak attack from that position is tactically impossible for a teenager unless he possesses decades of battle instinct. And without giving Frank room to reset, Ghislain shifts his weight and fluidly drives a lethal counterstrike straight toward his throat, slicing clean through his smoking pipe and cutting open the skin of his neck, which honestly reminds me of when my card declined at a restaurant right after I told my date money was no object. Except Ghislain's eyes widen as he feels his edge hit a wall of dense resistance instead of severing muscle, revealing that Frank focused a high-density layer of blue mana around his throat at the exact millisecond of impact, preventing instant decapitation, while internally sweating, realizing that if his defensive mana reaction had been a microsecond slower, his head would be rolling down the gutter. So Frank grips his hilt with both hands and releases his entire mana output, knowing he cannot afford to hold back against this kid. And as the blue energy erupts through the alleyway, Frank's grin twists into bloodlust, swearing that no matter what strange swordsmanship Ghislain learned, he will die in this alley. And Frank is out here laughing like a manic clown who just dodged a tax audit, bragging that if he hadn't coated his throat in dense blue mana at the last millisecond, his head would be rolling across the alley cobblestones, gripping his blade with a fresh surge of energy, mocking Ghislain for relying on strange swordsmanship that ultimately lacks raw power. And he lunges forward screaming that Ghislain is going to die right here, driving his blade straight into a violent collision, which Ghislain blocks without breaking a sweat, matching the mercenary's wild intensity with a calm, predatory smirk, locking his diamond-patterned blue eyes onto Frank, immediately analyzing every flaw in the broker's stance. And instead of playing defensive, he dips underneath the swing and drives a lightning-fast edge alignment straight through Frank's posture, blasting the broker backward with enough force to shatter his physical enhancement on impact. And even while sliding across the dirt, Frank adjusts his hat and smugly claims a tiny bit of mana won't change the outcome, only to instantly choke on his own blood and crash onto the stones as the delayed shockwave ruptures his internal defense, leaving the man clutching his chest in sheer confusion, wondering how a teenager managed to bypass high-density mana armor, while Ghislain steps into frame towering over him, surrounded by a dark, swirling aura that heavy matches his mercenary king days, confirming Frank is the direct catalyst behind his sister's original murder. And with twin blades drawn, Ghislain stops playing around and starts actively drawing environmental particles straight into his torso, unsealing his third core with zero hesitation, forcing a massive power jump that his unconditioned 14-year-old frame can barely hold together, which leaves Frank sweating like he just saw a ghost, utterly unable to fathom how a kid is pulling off a multi-core energy output, before Ghislain drops from above like an anvil, forcing Frank to frantically raise his blade just to survive the initial drop. And the resulting clash carves sparks into the night air as Ghislain pushes the pace without giving the broker a single second to reset, driving Frank backward step by step under a relentless barrage of dual blade pressure, till Frank's hands go numb from absorbing the kinetic force, watching in sheer horror as microcracks web across his metal blade, realizing no standard technique boosts mana this violently, feeling like he's fighting an ancient god of war wearing a teenager's skin. And Ghislain puts his entire weight into one downward cleave, shattering Frank's sword into flying metal shards that reflect the terror in the broker's eyes, and slicing deep across his chest, sending a violent spray of blood straight onto the stone road, closing the distance before the man even hits the floor, and snatching Frank directly by the throat, lifting the heavy mercenary straight into the air like a ragdoll, demanding to know who placed the hit on House Perdium while holding him suspended in midair, glancing back toward the unconscious Elena lying safely against the wall to ensure she's out of the crossfire, while Frank, realizing his main weapon is gone, quietly slides a concealed assassin dagger into his palm, and decides if he's going down, he's taking the young lady of Perdium with him, thrusting the blade straight toward her throat, only for glowing pink mana threads to snap out of thin air, binding his wrist so tight he can't move a single finger, leaving the broker completely paralyzed as Ghislain casually offers a deal, promising to sheath his blade if Frank drops the names. Though he reminds the mercenary that keeping his life won't mean much if his internal energy system gets permanently wiped first. And without waiting for a reply, Ghislain slams his mana-infused palm directly into Frank's lower abdomen, detonating a precise energy charge that instantly ruptures Frank's internal core, making the broker scream in raw agony as his internal mana unravels into chaotic waves. And Frank panics at the scattering orb, warning Ghislain that triggering a core backflow like this will detonate the entire courtyard and wipe them both out, asking if the kid is trying to commit suicide, to which Ghislain deadpants that self-destruction is strictly for scrub-tier amateurs, looking at him with glowing blue eyes, locked in and controlling the volatile energy with surgical precision, which makes Frank realize with terrifying clarity that this kid isn't bluffing. Seeing an actual human skull reflected inside Gislin's pupil, realizing he is staring directly at his own executioner. And the sheer terror finally breaks him, screaming at the top of his lungs that Count Desmond was the true employer who ordered the hit. Confessing that Desmond needed a bloody pretext to spark a regional war that would wipe out both House Perdium and House de Garde simultaneously. Which matches Gislin's memories of how Duke Delphine used proxy lords to run clandestine false flag operations behind the scenes during his previous life. And when Gislin confirms this was all to set up his sister's murder, Frank limply nods in complete submission. So Gislin channels a final surge through his fist, crushing the broker's windpipe. Looking down at the dying mercenary like my landlord looks at me on the first when I tell him my paycheck is pending, asking why a killer gets scared the second his own bill comes due. While Frank desperately croaks that killing him won't fix anything because his syndicate already completed the setup with the de Garde representative. Screaming that House Perdium is doomed to burn in the war regardless, but Gislin forcefully grabs his face to shut him up, leaning in close to whisper that he died and came back from the grave. And because he holds every piece of the puzzle this time, the history they planned is getting rewritten right now, detonating his energy straight into the broker's head with a violent roar, sending a towering purple shockwave crashing through the alleyway. And when the smoke clears, Gislin stands alone among the corpses of the syndicate assassins, leaving the entire alley silent, littered with the bodies of the traitors who thought they could sell out his family for a paycheck. As he turns his attention back to Elena, ensuring no remaining threats are left breathing in the area, before dropping his blade with a heavy clang, collapsing to his back as the massive strain finally catches up to him, coughing up thick crimson blood as internal hemorrhaging tears through his chest, crashing to his hands and knees, grimacing at how weak this 14-year-old body is compared to his former mercenary King Prime, gritting his teeth and forcing his fingers into the stone, refusing to pass out until the job is finished. And pushing himself back to his feet, he stumbles toward the nearby stone hideout, stepping into a dust-filled cellar where two bodies wrapped in bloodied white shrouds lie abandoned among broken planks. Recalling from his past life that investigators found these exact corpses next to Elena, identifying them as the young noble heir of House de Garde and his escort knight. Realizing Count Desmond had these men murdered beforehand, planning to leave their bodies beside Elena to frame House de Garde and trigger an instant war, which would have consumed both territories in a bloody conflict while the ducal house watched from the shadows. So Gislin reaches down and grabs the planted evidence, stuffing it into his pouch to erase the false trail, and lifting his unconscious sister onto his back, he steps out as flames consume the hideout behind them, swearing to crush every plan his enemies set in motion. Unaware that high above in the tree branches, a dark-hooded watcher sits in silence, tracking his every step through the burning night, before quietly vanishing into the dark, leaving only falling embers behind. The Shadow Council is already losing its collective mind over the total failure in the alleyway, screaming at the operative because they deployed elite guard knights alongside Frank, only for the mission to end in a total nightmare, leaving this handler kneeling on the cold floor, trying to explain that the target's brother was the sole reason everything fell apart, which immediately gets met with pure mockery from the rest of the table, because according to every piece of intelligence they bought, Gislin Perdium is supposed to be a useless, incompetent noble who couldn't swing a sword to save his life. So they genuinely think this man is making up excuses on the spot to cover up his own tactical blunder, not realizing the handler is currently having full-blown combat flashbacks to what actually went down in that alley. Remembering how Gislin drew his blade with zero wasted motion, moving at speed that defied physics as he unsealed his cores and took off heads before anyone could even process his trajectory. Weaving through high-tier assassins like a walking meat grinder, his blade cutting clean through Frank's defense while glowing with the distinct aura of a seasoned war god, and walking out of the inferno carrying his sister like he was just taking a casual stroll through a minor inconvenience. So while the handler knows this kid is a completely different creature than the reports claimed, he tries to pivot the conversation, reminding them that framing House de Garde's representative still gives them the green light for war, begging his superior for a second chance to clean up the mess, only for the man to completely blow up on him for failing what should have been a routine abduction, demanding Gislin's immediate death right before a cold, suffocating voice echoes through the dark room, telling everyone to shut their mouths, instantly locking the entire chamber in silence as the space gets washed in a heavy, ominous purple pressure, asking the handler what kind of chance he thinks he deserves after a mess like this. And the handler doesn't even hesitate, swearing he'll execute Gislin personally by setting up a duel that looks completely natural on paper, already having the exact weapon in mind to crush the kid, which piques the curiosity of the shadowy council sitting in the back, as he introduces Cain Loges, a freak of nature known across the region for pure strength-based swordsmanship, a guy who turns high-grade steel into flying toothpicks with raw brute force, making him the undisputed heavy hitter of the entire Northern Territory. And since Cain happens to be Gislin's direct cousin, orchestrating a lethal family reunion won't draw a single eye from regional authorities, prompting the hidden leader in the shadows to lean forward with a heavy threat, his single amber eye glowing like a predator locked onto its prey, making it crystal clear that if this backup plan fails, there won't be a body left to ask for a third chance. And as the operative bows in terror, the focus shifts back to the northern frontier, specifically the training grounds of House Perdium, where the stone corridors are usually completely silent, until Old Man Fergus walks down the hall to announce mealtime, only to get cut off mid-sentence by a violent surge of blue mana, barely raising his broadsword in time to catch a flying arc of compressed energy that rattles his entire skeleton. The sheer force of the shockwave tearing straight down the hall like a micro-tornado, leaving Ghislain casually lowering his blade, testing out his current output, and turning around to see the estate's veteran knight sweating through his plate armor. As Fergus stammers out a question, trying to process how a kid who never picked up a sword last week just threw a high-density mana slash. So Ghislain decides to blow the old man's mind even further, flicking his wrist to suspend his blade in midair using glowing blue energy, explaining the concept of mana threads like it's a basic middle school science experiment. While internally calculating that back in his past life as the Mercenary King, he used full webs of these threads, but in his current unconditioned 14-year-old body, spinning more than one fine thread would implode his unrefined core. Which means by condensing his focus into a single ultra-thin strand, he gets maximum precision without blowing out his internal organs. Leaving Fergus standing there stunned, because in all his decades of knight training, he's never seen micro-mana control applied with this level of finesse. Wondering how a kid who spent his entire life acting like a brainless delinquent suddenly understands top-tier energy physics. Before dropping his head in a deep, formal bow, genuinely thanking Ghislain for keeping Elena alive during the festival night, which Ghislain casually brushes off like a routine task, steering the old knight toward the dining hall. And over the next few days, the entire territory comes to a grinding halt as the annual festival gets officially shut down, which leaves Elena sitting at the dinner table in full pout mode, tapping her fingers because nobody in the castle believes her when she says her brother saved her. While Belinda loses her mind in the background, cursing out the dead bodyguards for being treasonous scum. And while Ghislain sits there looking composed, knowing his sister is safe for now, he realizes that shutting down Count Desmond's immediate framing plot is only a temporary pause button on a much larger threat. Meaning if he wants to protect House Perdium long-term, he can't rely on individual sword skills. He needs a proper army and actual political leverage. Though his grand strategic internal monologue gets immediately derailed when the maid sets down dinner, revealing a single, bone-dry piece of bread sitting alone on a silver platter, forcing Ghislain to look up in sheer confusion, asking why they're serving appetizer portions before the actual meal, only for a massive wall-shattering shout to erupt from right outside the castle walls, where an angry mob of local townspeople and merchants equipped with pitchforks and hammers is slamming against the iron gates, demanding full financial refunds for the festival cancellation, sending Ghislain straight to the windowsill, trying to make sense of the sudden peasant revolt. As Belinda explains that the entire territory's economy depends on the annual festival, meaning shutting it down on day one just bankrupted every vendor in town. And looking at the crowd sharpening their tools outside, Ghislain knows if he doesn't handle this immediately, this economic riot will burn down the front gates faster than any external army. So he turns to Fergus and orders him to deploy the castle garrison to disperse the crowd, only for Fergus to drop a bomb, revealing they have 0 soldiers on standby, explaining that every single guard was dispatched to the Forest of Monsters border post for emergency reconstruction following the Red Orc raid, leaving County Perdium completely naked, trapped in a tactical pincer between northern barbarians on one side and monster hordes on the other, which pushes Ghislain to pivot to Plan B, grabbing Belinda to ask for his personal allowance money so he can just buy off the angry merchants, only for Belinda to hit him with a deadpan reality check, pointing out that there isn't a single copper coin left in the vault, reminding him that his past self spent money like water, prompting his father to cut off his allowance entirely years ago, leaving him standing there in total disbelief, begging his maid for a loan only to get flat out denied on the spot. So he sits on the window ledge looking out over the town, realizing that having future Grandmaster tactical knowledge is completely useless when you have 0 troops and a bank account in the negative. Pacing down the hallway to figure out an emergency economic scam before the mob breaks through, when Ricardo violently kicks the door open in a full panic, gasping for air as he tries to deliver an urgent message to the young master, screaming out that young Master Kane has arrived and is demanding an immediate audience. Right as down in the stone corridor, a duty guard knight is getting his armor pulverized by an incoming heavy strike, a massive, vein-popping fist moving with brutal speed, caving in the knight's chest plate with an explosive shockwave of compressed red aura, shattering the guard's ribs and leaving him gasping on the cold floor, as the bloodied knight collapses right at Ghislain's boots, struggling to keep his eyes open, coughing up crimson as he looks up at Ghislain in sheer desperation. And Ghislain's gaze narrows, locking onto the threat standing right behind him, where a towering, masked juggernaut coated in a violent red aura looms over him like a walking brick wall, smirking down with glowing yellow eyes as he casually greets his cousin, leaving Ghislain face to face with a blood-splattered monster, knowing the conspiracy's physical heavy hitter has officially arrived at his doorstep. Ghislain isn't even flinching as he locks eyes with the intruder, looking down at this shirtless, dark-skinned giant standing directly over him with a blood-soaked coat, and a menacing yellow-eyed grin that practically screams he thinks he owns the whole hallway, which immediately triggers Ghislain's past life memory, recognizing the exact face of his cousin, Kane Loges, the heir of Loges County, who is supposed to be an official ally of the family, and someone who used to pretend to be Ghislain's close friend while quietly acting as his worst enemy, walking right into the corridor like he's returning from a personal vacation, while a castle guard knight lies beaten into a pulp on the stone floor right behind him, forcing Ricardo to recount how Kane showed up at the local tavern earlier with a cloaked escort knight. And the second Commander Scoven tried confirming the rumors of Ghislain taking down orcs. Kane's hooded handler grabbed Scoven by the neck, screaming about disrespecting the Loge's name, before Kane cuts Ricardo off in the present, stepping closer to spin his own fake narrative, claiming he only handed out a small wake-up call to teach the garrison some manners for spreading fake news, which takes Ghislaine right back to his original timeline, remembering how Kane constantly used his raw physical size to treat him like a personal servant, breaking things around the estate, forcing young Ghislaine to cover for his disasters, and making Ghislaine feel so inferior that he let Kane walk all over him, which feels like when my college roommate drank all my milk, broke my microwave, and then asked me to pay for his Uber Eats, leaving Ghislaine to take all the blame from the estate elders while Kane got praised as the ideal heir. And right now, Kane is standing there smirking, fully expecting Ghislaine to crash out recklessly like he always used to, unaware of what happened a few hours ago at Loges County Manor in the pouring rain, where Count Desmond's secret handler sat down with Kane, making a direct deal to support his family, provided Kane eliminates Ghislaine, which Kane knew was politically risky to pull off as a direct murder, leading the hooded handler to pitch a strategic blueprint, provoking Ghislaine into a brawl and luring him into a formal duel, framing Ghislaine's death as an unfortunate accident while the handler acts as Kane's disguised escort. And Kane didn't even hesitate, putting on his gloves to execute the hit immediately, wondering if the syndicate wanted Ghislaine dead because he was changing, while smirking at the easy payoff. Cut back to the present, where Ghislaine just stands there giving him a blank tilt of the head, as Kane sits down on the stone bench and demands the usual luxury amenities prepared for his visit, telling that since the festival got cancelled, Ghislaine better bring out the top-tier booze and entertainment to liven things up, expecting Ghislaine to scramble around like a timid little servant boy, because in the past, Ghislaine always catered to Kane's every demand just to avoid getting beaten up, which was the exact reason Head made Belinda revoked Ghislaine's allowance after he blew the estate vault on Kane's habits. And suddenly, the gears in Ghislaine's brain lock into place, as his blue eyes light up, looking at Kane not as an intimidating bully, but as a walking wallet. While Kane keeps barking orders from the bench, completely unaware that he just became the estate's financial solution. So Ghislaine deadpants right to his face, asking if Kane remembers the massive debt he owes him, leaning directly into Kane's space while the hooded handler in the back gets visibly confused. And Kane's arrogant smirk drops instantly as Ghislaine demands a full 1,000 gold pieces, causing Kane to lose his temper, yelling that 1,000 gold is highway robbery for what was supposed to be a friendship fee, only for Ghislaine to look down at him with a predatory smile, telling him to pay up before he gets put in the ground, explaining with cold precision that he needs serious capital to handle the territory's current emergency, while Ricardo stands in the background sweating bullets as Ghislaine takes a step forward, mocking Kane for thinking he can keep acting tough just because Ghislaine let him slide in the past, which sends Kane straight into a rage, screaming that Ghislaine is just a fraud leeching off the land, clenching a massive, aura-infused fist and driving a heavy strike straight down toward Ghislaine's head, while Ghislaine doesn't even move a muscle, keeping his posture completely relaxed. And right as the fist comes crashing down, the surrounding guards flinch in terror, only for Ghislaine to slide past the punch with a subtle blue movement blur, leaving Kane swinging at air. And before Kane can recover his balance, Ghislaine catches the incoming arm mid-strike, redirecting all of Kane's forward momentum into the stone floor with zero wasted energy, grabbing Kane's wrist in a tight lock that freezes the brute in place, slamming Kane face first onto the tiles before his hooded handler can even process what happened, forcing the handler to rush over in a panic, checking if his puppet heir is still conscious, while Ghislaine tells Kane to quit faking because he knows he braced for impact, leaving the spectators on the balcony gasping as Ghislaine lets out a dry, satisfied chuckle, knowing that the conspirators are trying to play a classic provocation game, which is why the hooded handler is secretly celebrating, thinking Ghislaine just walked right into their duel trap. And Kane scrambles up to his feet, trying to put on a grand dramatic performance for the witnesses, remembering how the syndicate promised him full support if he finishes the job, drawing his sword and yelling about noble dignity before trying to issue the official challenge, only for Ghislaine to cut him off mid-sentence, stealing the duel challenge right out of his mouth.
You can't keep getting away with it! He can't keep getting away with it! He won't.
Leaving Kane utterly stunned while Ghislaine lays out the official charges in front of the entire corridor, pointing out that Kane publicly insulted the family heir and brutally assaulted a castle guard knight, asking Kane if he dares deny the charges right in front of all these eyes, which makes Kane recover his smirk, thinking Ghislaine is an idiot digging his own grave by agreeing to fight, drawing his blade fully and accepting the duel with a promise to end Ghislaine's life, while Ghislaine stands there with complete composure, having set up the exact outcome he wanted, casually turning his back on Kane's threats and calling out to Ricardo, ordering his retainer to head straight to the estate gates and gather all the angry merchants protesting outside, with a cold smirk, telling Ricardo to let the merchants know they're about to make big money, watching him harvest 1,000 gold from his cousin. So with the entire festival getting shut down out of nowhere, the hype in the estate dies down instantly, leaving a whole crowd of stranded tourists just wandering the streets, holding bags full of coin they can't even spend, which is exactly the kind of financial gridlock Ghislaine was waiting to exploit, knowing all these people need is one massive event to dump their money into. And right on cue, a massive roar shakes the central ring as he steps out into the open arena in a simple white shirt, giving the crowd the exact spectacle they were starving for. with every spectator in the stands instantly jumping at the chance to bet their savings on Kane, fully convinced Ghislain is about to get his jaw spun. While local merchants start screaming out buy one get one deals in the rain, and a bearded bookie sets up a wooden desk right on the spot to start taking wagers, causing a whole avalanche of gold coins to hit the ledger, because to these clueless extras, betting on the shirtless brute is free money. And Kane stands there holding his massive blade like a proud hero, bitching about how Ghislain ruined a sacred noble duel by turning it into a swap meet, promising with a twisted smirk that he won't stop his blade even if Ghislain begs for mercy, which Ghislain just absorbs with the coldest look in his eyes, already knowing Kane's disguised escort knight is standing in the back, pulling the strings to turn this staged fight into a legal assassination. So Ghislain just looks around at the packed stadium, casually noting that enough fools have gathered with their wallets open, which catches the conspirator handler off guard for a split second, realizing the narrative isn't quite following his script, especially when the bookie starts sweating through his coat, panicking that nobody is willing to put a single copper on the house heir, giving Ghislain the perfect opening to mock Kane directly, pointing out that the outcome is so one-sided even the marketplace refuses to take him seriously, forcing the blue-hooded conspirator to step in and slam a heavy sack of gold on the desk, changing the bet to how many seconds Ghislain can survive. And right when everyone thinks the house is going down in total ruin, a quiet smirk touches the edge of the screen, as another bag of cold hard cash hits the counter with a loud thud, and Lady Elena steps up beside her SSS tier maid, declaring she's putting the family treasury on her big brother, leaving the entire crowd speechless, while Ghislain blinks in mild shock seeing his sister drop the bag like a certified menace. Which makes total sense, because just minutes earlier, Ghislain personally met with the bookie behind closed doors to bankroll the entire operation and guarantee House Perdium controls the house odds. And Kane is over here blowing a fuse from waiting, utterly clueless that he's being used as an ATM. When Ghislain hits him with the ultimate disrespect, casually telling him that as the elder brother it'd look bad if he hit first, he draws his steel with the most unbothered motion imaginable, holding his stance wide to hit Kane with a cold invitation to shoot his shot, which instantly triggers Kane's fragile ego, his amber eyes burning with pure rage, screaming that Ghislain already lost all his dignity before dropping low into a wild power stance. And the second the match starts, Kane stomps through the wooden floorboards, launching his muscular frame into the air like a madman to bring a brutal execution strike straight down onto Ghislain's head, only for Ghislain to catch the whole weight of the blow on his blade, sparks detonating between them while his blue eyes stay focused. So Kane just grins like a feral dog, thinking his raw physical weight is going to break Ghislain's guard, and starts throwing wide, violent swings that shatter the floorboards into splintered dust, trying to force Ghislain into panic evasion, unleashing a continuous wall of red aura strikes that cover the entire ring, blowing up huge clouds of debris that have the spectators screaming in hype, thinking the fraud was getting erased in one hit. As Kane smirks through the smoke, completely convinced he just ran his cousin through the meat grinder, while Belinda loses her mind in the stands, unaware that Kane's signature strategy relies on overwhelming opponents until they exhaust themselves on defense. A psychological trap that forces people to burn through their stamina trying to escape his momentum, leaving them wide open for a free kill, which is how Kane built his undefeated streak against mid-tier noble trash. So when Ghislain slips past his blade again, Kane actually thinks he's complimenting him, putting up another massive overhead swing to smash through Ghislain's balance, and locks blades with him directly, taunting Ghislain about how he used to run away back in the day, before putting his whole body weight into a shove that launches Ghislain flying backward through the air, leaving Ghislain airborne with zero ground leverage, while the crowd screams as Kane leaps up to deliver the final execution strike, screaming for him to die with a face full of sadistic joy, thinking he secured the cleanest kill of his career. Except Ghislain is looking up at that blade like how my ex looked at me when my card declined at Denny's right after I promised her the world, and instantly activates his Grandmaster thread technique, micro-condensing blue mana straight into the muscle fibers of his lower legs, canceling his momentum midair and converting his center of mass into a grounded launch pad, exploding forward like a coiled spring, which causes Kane's eyes to bug out in utter horror, realizing this man just broke the laws of combat physics right in front of him, as Ghislain's blade flashes in a blinding arc, slicing straight across Kane's shirtless chest before he can even pull his guard back, and lands cleanly on his feet while his aura settles like a gentle breeze, forcing Kane onto his knees, gasping for breath while trying to cope out loud that Ghislain was just using flashy tricks. So Ghislain turns around with those ice blue eyes and hits him with a line so disrespectful it freezes the whole stadium, making Kane crash out, roaring like a wounded animal as he charges back in, only for Ghislain to slip under his guard with ghost-like frame data, leaping over his broad shoulders like he's playing leapfrog in the middle of a war zone, and parrying a desperate blind swing with such precision that the impact ripples straight up Kane's arms, shattering his grip as his shoulders collapse under the shockwave, and bringing a sharp counterstrike down that forces the brute straight back onto the floorboards, parrying him so clean that Sekiro veterans in the chat are dropping their controllers in respect, and stepping back with composure while Kane sits there bleeding into the dust, stripped of his undefeated aura, clutching his weapon on his knees with blood dripping down his chest, sending shockwaves through the audience as the crowd erupts over how the domain's biggest loser just dismantled an elite swordsman, while gamblers who put their life savings on Kane start screaming in agony, and little Elena turns to her maid with the most satisfied smug face on the continent, And Kane looks down at his chest in pure terror, realizing the cut didn't even touch his ribs, meaning Ghislain pulled his strike mid-swing just to spare his pathetic life, leaving him sweating buckets as he stares up at the man he used to bully, realizing he's looking at a grandmaster. So Ghislain looks down at him with zero emotion, unclasps his fingers, and lets his blade hit the stone with a loud ringing thud, announcing to the entire arena that such a massive gap in skill makes for terrible entertainment. So he's dropping his weapon to fight barehanded, which breaks Kane's mind, his eyes bulging out as Ghislain calmly explains that since his cousin never learned manners, he's about to personally deliver a bare-knuckle discipline lesson, and slowly tightens his right fist, getting ready to give this bully the beating of a lifetime. Kane is kneeling on the floor, sweating bullets, looking up in sheer disbelief, as Ghislain casually steps forward, offering a barehanded fight handicap and doubling his own wager by 2,000 gold, which sends shockwaves straight through the spectators, leaving every single gambler whispering in total confusion. While Kane's manic brain processes the offer, realizing this arrogant idiot just handed him the easiest kill of his life. So the bookie yells out to the arena floor, reopening the betting desk for additional wagers. And while half the crowd bets on Kane's brute physical force, the rest pivot straight to Ghislain, as Kane lets out a breathless laugh, mocking Ghislain for dropping his blade, which is when Kane discards his own sword onto the stone with a dull metallic thud, only to immediately go back on his word the second Ghislain turns his body, retrieving his heavy longsword with glowing eyes and screaming that he'll use steel anyway, causing Belinda to jump up from the balcony in total rage, screaming at Ghislain to pick up his blade, as Kane brings down a lethal overhead strike, aiming to cleave Ghislain in two. But Ghislain doesn't even flinch, standing unbothered as the sword descends, executing a razor-thin spatial duck beneath the strike as the blade shatters the stone floor, and using that exact opening to accelerate forward with precise footwork, driving a heavy mana-infused fist straight into Kane's exposed ribs, and following up with a brutal right hook across his jaw that sends blood spraying across the wooden ring, leaving Kane slumped downward, dripping blood onto the stone, collapsing onto his hands and knees in total shock as the stadium gasps, while Ghislain stands over him with glowing blue eyes, telling the broken brute to stand back up, coldly reminding Kane that he hasn't even started yet, which triggers a manic rage, as Kane leaps airborne once more, swinging wildly with desperate, uncoordinated strikes, which Ghislain effortlessly dodges while bringing up Kane's past habit of bowing down in fear, pivoting inside Kane's guard to land another sequence of bare-knuckle strikes, driving a brutal blow into his solar plexus as Kane screams about securing his family's future, leaving Kane's eyes wide with horror as his defense breaks down, allowing Ghislain to launch a relentless, rhythmic barrage of fists, pummeling Kane's face and body with non-stop barehanded impacts, battering the muscular brute until every ounce of fight drains out of him, leaving Kane limp in the dirt, gasping for air through swollen, bloodied lips as his mind breaks down. So Ghislain reaches down, grabbing Kane by the hair to yank his head backward, looking down into his swollen eyes and stating that he pities Count Loges for having such a greedy son, because while Count Loges risked his own territory to help House Perdium years ago, in the pouring rain outside the Loges estate, his own retainers begged Count Loges to stop pouring resources into a dying house. And young Kane stood in the hallway, pleading with his father to turn back, demanding to know why he insisted on saving an estate that was already falling apart, only for Count Loges to answer stoically that he did it simply because they were friends, proving his father was a man of honor, unlike the pathetic brute kneeling in the mud, which is why Ghislain offers no further mercy, asking if this disciplinary lesson was finally enough to fix his mind, as Kane's golden eye snaps open in total resignation, looking up at Ghislain's shadow. So Ghislain extends his open hand, offering him one final chance to surrender, and Kane bows his head in total submission, muttering his public defeat, sending the entire stadium into immediate silence as the crowd tries to process what happened, before the bookie shouts out Ghislain's decisive victory to the cheering crowd, leaving every single gambler screaming in financial ruin while Elena celebrates in joy. But near the railing, Count Desmond's disguised handler loses his cool, grabbing the bloodied Kane by his collar, screaming at him for giving up so easily, only for Kane to shove him away and resign, which leaves the handler cursing under his breath until Ghislain steps up right behind him, flashing a calm, untroubled smile as the disguised operative turns around in terror, and shouting out to the entire stadium that this generous man volunteered to buy meat and drinks for everyone, which causes the crowd to erupt into massive cheers while the handler screams in protest. So Ghislain clamps a heavy hand onto his shoulder, explaining that this is the penalty for losing, reminding him to add 2,000 gold to the original wager without deducting the feast costs, and shoving his head downward while flaring a terrifying red aura, promising terrible consequences if he tries to run, forcing the terrified handler to instantly agree, allowing Ghislain to casually walk away from the arena floor, leaving his broken cousin in the dirt. And by the next morning at Castle Perdium, sunlight streams into Ghislain's private chambers, where a massive wooden chest sits open, overflowing with shimmering gold coins. So Ghislain picks up a heavy coin, calculating that this bag is enough to hire a small mercenary corps, realizing he needs to scale his domain businesses even faster, while Belinda and Elena stand behind him. So Elena smirks and asks where he plans on spending all that coin, prompting Ghislain to offer her a cut, which she laughs off, allowing Belinda to step in with supreme confidence, claiming it's obvious he raised 3,000 gold to buy a gift for Lady Amelia's upcoming birthday, as Elena teases him for trying so hard to impress his fiancée, causing Gislin's brain to freeze. As he stares in paralyzed shock, realizing his 14-year-old body comes with a political engagement. And right as Gislin is sitting at his desk trying to process his newly acquired wealth, he freezes up like a dial-up modem. Because hearing the name Amelia Rayfold instantly triggers a catastrophic core memory from his past life. And the entire atmosphere shifts into dark red aura territory as he pictures the Black Widow herself. A woman who built her whole reputation on playing the saintly public philanthropist. When in reality, she becomes the Witch of the North who partnered with Duke Delphine to burn his entire domain to ash. Which brings a sinister smirk right to his face because instead of panic, all he sees is another prime target. So he casually checks how long his father is going to be away on business, confirming a 7-day window, before standing up and announcing he's taking a trip to Rayfold County to rob his own fiancée blind. And he doesn't even waste a single second packing. Meanwhile, over in Rayfold County, we get our first look at this SSS tier baddie who has half the audience hitting pause. As she kneels down in the middle of a dirt road to hand a pair of luxury shoes to a random peasant child, putting on a full-blown PR campaign right in front of the local crowd. And as the poor kid stands there utterly bewildered, Amelia delivers a calculated, heroic line about how, if anyone should walk barefoot on her land, it ought to be her, before ordering her garrison to drop food crates, getting the entire village to chant her name while her soldiers unload domain supplies. And she walks back through the dirt barefoot, fully aware that peasant loyalty is bought with cheap bread. Retreating into her private garden gazebo, where her head escort knight Bernaf is down on his knees scrubbing her feet, while she reflects on how her tyrant father tried to rule through fear, whereas she prefers tactical propaganda. Smoothly stroking a massive white cat as she lays out her political doctrine on controlling the masses. And Bernaf confirms that her fake charity work is securing her the upper hand in her family succession war, prompting her to casually press her bare foot right against his face to check on his secret operations. And Bernaf doesn't even flinch, explaining that he threw his duel against the Northern Swordmaster on purpose, reverently kissing her foot like a certified bottom-tier NPC to prove his total submission. So Amelia shifts over to her dark-haired handler, grabbing his jawline with a venomous glare, reminding him that weakness isn't tolerated under her roof before demanding an update on their Shadow Guild, where the handler admits they've been using the Arctium Merchant Guild to siphon back every coin sent to Perdium, while simultaneously poaching Perdium's deserting veteran knights to build a private army in secret, which she commands him to keep completely undercover, right until an anxious old butler interrupts the meeting, sweating through his formal rough collar to announce that Gislin Perdium has barged through the estate gates, instantly ruining her mood as she wonders why her supposed weakling fiancé is showing up unannounced, only for her handler to drop the bomb that Gislin specifically asked to discuss the Merchant Guild, leading us straight into the formal visitors' hall where Gislin is already lounged out on her velvet couch, looking totally unbothered as he greets her like an old friend, even as her fluffy white cat starts hissing bloody murder the second it catches his vibe. And when Amelia tries to lecture him about proper noble etiquette, Gislin just smirks and holds out a flower, placing it on the table while casually asking if she's familiar with a place called the Arctium Merchant Guild, which causes her red eyes to narrow as she hits him with a cold, defensive wall of silence, abruptly standing up with her cat to cut the meeting short and walk out, only for Gislin's voice to drop 3 octaves as he gives her a direct command to sit her ass back down, releasing a wave of raw spiritual pressure so heavy that the tea inside her golden cup starts vibrating, paralyzing her in place as Gislin takes a calm sip of tea and states he needs cash, demanding 10,000 gold on the spot, while completely ignoring her attempts to bring up his father, before dropping the ultimate truth bomb by pointing out that she never intended to marry him anyway, locking her in a deadly staring contest as the color drains from her face, as he exposes her entire covert operation, including her secret troop recruitment and her throne duels, causing her white cat to completely crash out as her carefully crafted Saint Persona shatters into pieces. So she drops the act entirely, threatening to leak his aggressive extortions if he doesn't walk away. But Gislin just smiles because he holds every single card, prompting her to yell out for Bernaf. And the gray-haired executioner steps through the double doors with his hand already resting on his blade, towering over the couch as Gislin internally identifies him as Amelia's personal shadow enforcer, a high-tier master whose blade speed rivals the top swordsman of the Northern Territory. So Gislin asks if she can really handle the political backlash of murdering a domain heir. And Amelia doesn't hesitate for a microsecond, holding a spider to her lips as she orders his immediate execution, prompting Gislin's hand to slide smoothly onto his own sword hilt without an ounce of fear, his blue aura flaring to life as he decides it's finally time to show these traitors what a real sword master looks like. The moment Lady Amelia issues the kill order, her personal executioner Bernaf drops all pretense of noble decorum, flaring a dark purple aura as he lunges forward, smiling with the arrogant confidence of a man who thinks a surprise attack is an easy win. But Gislin's eyes sharpen in a split second, already tracking the trajectory. Because before Gislin can even stand up from the sofa, the assassin hurls an entire wooden chair directly at his head while closing the distance with a rapier, forcing Gislin to react purely on instinct as the lethal steel thrusts right behind the flying furniture. So Gislin flips backwards midair, barely letting the airborne chair brush past his coat to avoid getting impaled on the spot. But Bernaf uses that exact aerial position to land a flying kick directly into his chest, sending Gislin crashing down onto the stone floor. Yet instead of panicking, Ghislain rolls smoothly back to his feet, drawing his blade as the shadow agents in the back freeze in shock. Because Ghislain isn't even trembling, calmly wiping dust off his collar while mocking their pathetic lack of hospitality, and instantly meets Bernafa's thrust with a sharp clash of steel, sparks flying across the hall as he asks if House Rayfold entirely forgot what honor means. Only for Bernaf to press his rapier down with raw physical weight, arrogantly lecturing Ghislain that breaking into the estate unannounced erased any right to polite treatment. Swinging a vicious follow-up arc that forces Ghislain to parry under heavy pressure, the sheer velocity of the blade echoing through the chamber. Before Bernaf snaps a high kick toward Ghislain's temple, forcing the kid to duck below the wind pressure, and reset his footwork on the floor while both swordsmen create space to reset the arena. Which makes Bernafa's jaw tighten, realization hitting him that the useless noble heir he was hired to execute is moving like a seasoned monster. While Lady Amelia watches from the gazebo with pure disgust, utterly furious that her secret top-tier swordmaster isn't insta-killing a 14-year-old. Holding that creepy red-eyed spider to her chin as she issues a cold ultimatum, telling Bernaf to bring her Ghislain's head right now if he wants to prove his loyalty. So Bernaf draws his rapier to full length, a deep blue aura creeping across the steel as he promises his mistress victory. Ghislain just glares back with icy blue eyes, unimpressed that a glorified guard dog thinks he can dictate terms to a true master. Stepping forward into a broad guard stance, ready to break this man's spirit piece by piece. As Bernaf accepts the challenge, locking eyes across the dark-tiled floor before launching forward. Unleashing a thrust so fast the air itself rips apart in a blue streak, forcing Ghislain's pupil to dilate as he calculates the speed. Leaning his torso back at an impossible angle to let the lethal point shave past his nose by mere millimeters. Entering a high-speed clash where both blades blur together, steel grinding against steel in a relentless exchange of lethal thrusts. As Ghislain parries every single strike with microscopic efficiency, matching a high-tier master move for move. Which leaves Lady Amelia standing there in complete disbelief, unable to process how the domain clown is fighting her secret weapon on equal footing. But as their weapons lock again, Bernaf shifts his weight forward, using his fully grown adult body frame to overpower Ghislain's smaller build, driving his shoulder directly into the clash to disrupt Ghislain's balance, and capitalizing on the opening to force Ghislain's blade out of alignment. So when Ghislain tries to slip behind his flank with standard footwork, Bernaf reads the movement instantly, closing the distance to lock Ghislain in a tight grapple. Smirking as he snaps a heavy boot right into Ghislain's midsection, proving that tricks don't work twice on a professional. Knocking all the air out of Ghislain's lungs as he follows up with a lethal downward rapier thrust, forcing Ghislain to scramble across the stone tiles just to avoid being pinned to the floor like a bug. Crouched in the dust while Bernaf stands over him, casually explaining that Ghislain's crude, battlefield-forged instincts might work against northern barbarians, but mean nothing against formal sword mastery. As the disarmed longsword clatters against the floor, leaving Ghislain kneeling in what looks like total defeat. With Bernaf delivering an arrogant final speech, declaring that this foolish rebellion ends right here. Except Ghislain's mind is running complex tactical math, analyzing how those rapid head thrusts intentionally ruin an opponent's perception of distance and timing. Recognizing that his 14-year-old frame simply lacks the raw physical reach and weight to overpower an adult swordmaster through basic fencing. So instead of panicking over the physical handicap, Ghislain's eyes flare with bright blue energy as he decides to stop playing by their rules. Unsealing his third core microcontrol to shoot an ultra-fine, razor-sharp mana thread directly from his fingertips into the air. And Bernafa's eyes go wide in sheer terror as he recognizes the Grandmaster technique cutting through his guard. Too late to block as the filament slashes clean across his forehead, spraying blood and blinding his vision. Allowing Ghislain to launch a flying knee directly into his ribs, followed immediately by a heavy bare-knuckle punch to the jaw that shatters Bernafa's posture. Sending Lady Amelia into a high-pitched scream as she watches her top-tier escort get violently dismantled in a second, while Ghislain leaps mid-air like a relentless predator, coming down on the bloodied knight with pure savagery, forcing Bernaf to barely raise his guard as the raw impact rattles his entire skeleton. And as they separate across the room, the arrogant executioner is left gasping for breath, clutching his bleeding face, turning toward Lady Amelia with genuine panic in his eyes, begging her to grab her pet and evacuate the estate immediately, because he realizes he will get slaughtered unless he unseals 100% of his aura output, flaring a massive wave of dark blue energy that shakes the very foundation of the chamber, which only causes Ghislain to flash a dangerously smug grin, glowing eyes locking onto his opponent as the real fight finally begins. Standing tall in the swirling energy currents, fully prepared to strip this domain of its wealth and force House Rayfold onto its knees. Sprinting through the estate corridors while clutching a white cat like her life depends on it, Lady Amelia's operative is fuming over how her covert network got exposed. Unable to process how Ghislain obtained precise intelligence on the Arctia Merchant Guild, especially when those wild rumors of him wiping out red orcs were supposed to be noble propaganda. Realizing way too late that every single rumor about his combat exploits was standard reality, which turns her panic into pure frustration as she looks for her pre-station guards, rounding the corner only to find the entire hallway dripping in silent, cold blue light, where every single station guard is already laid out cold across the stone floor without having raised a single alarm. And standing right over the pile of bodies is head maid Belinda, looking completely unfazed as she turns around with a predatory smirk, casually greeting the operative while the poor girl freezes in place, holding her cat like a shield. Before Belinda vanishes from sight and reappears directly behind her neck, pressing a sharp pair of scissors to her throat to keep her quiet, snapping off the live spider parasite attached to her lip without breaking a sweat, leaving the operative trembling in pure horror. As Belinda calmly reflects back on an old memory from House Perdium's historical records, recalling how this operative used to get bullied by her siblings over spiders as a kid, only to raise a full swarm and terrorize her entire family for revenge, dropping the wriggling creature onto the stone tiles while pointing out how pathetic it is to use childhood trauma as a defense mechanism, and crushing the parasite into a dark stain under her boot, forcing full cooperation before she takes out the scissors again. Meanwhile, back inside the Grand Pavilion, Bernaf is flaring his unsealed dark blue aura output so hard the atmospheric density is making the stone floor shake, forcing Ghislaine to analyze the sheer volume of energy radiating off this guy, realizing he's dealing with a genuine top-tier swordmaster. While Bernaf steps forward with heavy boots, arrogance dripping off his voice as he looks down at Ghislaine, calling Ghislaine's combat mindset that of a low-tier mercenary, which Ghislaine laughs off by reminding him that an escort knight trying to lecture a noble is peak comedy, prompting Bernaf to abandon verbal sparring and launch straight into a high-speed lunge, clashing blades with a deafening impact that sends bright blue energy arcs flying across the chamber, driving Ghislaine back with a relentless barrage of thrusts, yelling at him not to disgrace the noble title, putting massive pressure on Ghislaine's 14-year-old frame as the reach disadvantage starts showing, forcing Ghislaine to strain under the kinetic weight of every strike, realizing this guy isn't leaving a single opening to reset, pushing the pace so aggressively that Ghislaine's footwork gets trapped against the tiled floor. So Ghislaine decides to stop playing passive, gripping his hilt with both hands and shouting to break the rhythm, leaping midair to bring down a heavy overhead arc strike right on Bernaf's guard, which Bernaf catches on a blade bind, using his superior adult leverage to shove Ghislaine back, smirking under his hood like he just closed out the match, declaring that Ghislaine just threw his final attack, swinging his rapier in a lethal execution arc, except Ghislaine deliberately braces his shoulder to absorb the blade's edge directly into his flesh, using his own collarbone as a physical wedge to shove the rapier off course and shatter Bernaf's momentum, leaving the seasoned master in shock as blood splatters across the floor, unable to fathom a kid sacrificing his own body for tactical leverage, trying to readjust his grip and launch a follow-up thrust before Ghislaine can capitalize. While Ghislaine stands tall, cold eyes locked in as he points out the difference between someone who fights for show and a man who survived 10 years of war. Watching Bernaf attempt to lock their weapons in another close-quarters bind, analyzing how Bernaf uses high-speed consecutive strikes to control spatial distance, noticing that Bernaf thinks Ghislaine's combat ceiling is limited by his current physical body's mana reserves, without realizing that Ghislaine has been sitting on a massive power spike this whole time, and that he overlooked the fundamental mechanics of his cultivation technique, unsealing his third core mid-fight as a radiant pink-red aura erupts straight from his chest, turning into a dynamic blur of dark red motion that cuts diagonally across the hall, colliding with Bernaf's guard and blowing his dark blue aura output to pieces, ripping his sword hilt as the thermal pressure shatters the surrounding floor tiles, driving his blade down with multi-core energy that collapses Bernaf's posture, carving a massive arc of raw force through the air, and slamming into Bernaf's final desperate parry with enough power to rattle his entire skeleton, leaving the high-tier swordmaster bloodied, bruised, and staring up in utter dread, as Ghislaine descends from above like a judgment strike, stopping the tip of his long sword a fraction of an inch from Bernaf's forehead, leaving the unsealed master on his knees at sword point, completely defeated in front of his lady, while Lady Amelia loses her mind in total panic, holding a knife to her own throat and offering 10,000 gold just to get him out of her domain, which Ghislaine brushes off with total boredom, reminding her that handing over the bag when he asked nicely would have saved her the melodrama, pressing the cold steel of his long sword straight against her throat, smirking as he lets her know the hush money fee just doubled to 20,000 gold, leaving the grand hall littered with unconscious plate-armored guards, and turning Lady Amelia's pristine study into a war zone where even the estate pet is forced to hide under the furniture, while shattered porcelain pieces rain down on the floor between Amelia and her broken champion, with Bernaf bowing his head in deep shame, admitting that Ghislaine's sudden mana burst surpassed an advanced knight, which instantly sends Amelia's eyes glowing with blood-red malice, staring into space as she realizes her former deadbeat fiancé is no longer an easy mark, before Bernaf casually asks if they should report this disaster to Duke Delphine, which gets him grabbed by the collar instantly, with Amelia snarling at him to shut his mouth before he gets them both executed. Because if the Duke discovers Ghislaine just extorted 20,000 gold out of her front merchant guild, her entire secret rebellion pact to tear down House Perdium collapses, and her own siblings will end her life. So her eyes narrow with total murderous resolve, declaring that Ghislaine has to be eliminated at all costs, while Bernaf checks on the tactical reality, reporting that he managed to land a severe shoulder wound and drain Ghislaine's mana reserves, though his own instincts are warning him that something is deeply wrong, calling how noble houses run off-the-books hits without leaving paper trails to their official knight orders, which means deploying the Wildcats, a ruthless syndicate of mana-proficient war orphans and human traffickers who operate completely in the shadows. As a hand plants a marker on the map, with Amelia ordering a dozen of her deadliest covert assassins to assemble immediately, targeting the narrow ravine that serves as the only direct mountain pass between Rayfold territory and Castle Perdium, setting up a fatal choke point in the tight terrain where a wounded target can be quietly slaughtered without witnesses. While Amelia's hatred boils over in the dark, staring down from her luxury carriage with glowing red eyes, swearing that Ghislain will pay double for making a fool out of her. Meanwhile, Ghislain sits shirtless inside his own carriage, running his fingers over the fresh blades slash across his shoulder. And when Fergus panics over the blood, Ghislain just pulls his tunic back up like it's a minor scratch, inwardly calculating that extorting 20,000 gold just saved House Perdium 3 full years of economic grinding. Because as much as he wanted to take Amelia's head right then and there, starting an open regional war while his domain is broke would be tactical suicide. So adjusting his jacket, he chooses cold financial leverage over impulsive revenge, knowing that holding the secret of her front guild gives him complete control over her next move. And looking across the carriage at his white-haired headmaid, he resolves to start putting every asset around him to work, which prompts Belinda to speak up, asking if everything went according to plan since she subdued the outer guards the second the fighting started, only for Ghislain to give her a deadpan stare, realizing mid-sentence that he actually gave that specific job to Fergus. Before his posture suddenly collapses, clutching his chest in agony as the severe recoil of unsealing his third core hits his young body. Staring at the blood pooled in his palm, knowing that using high-tier mana without an expanded internal core system is going to tear his body apart if he doesn't fix it fast, until a slender hand reaches out and grabs his wrist, with Belinda pulling out a glowing mana needle while pointing out that his internal meridians are a total disaster. And as she channels aura straight through his chest, Ghislain's pupil dilates in utter shock, gasping for air as the internal pressure spikes, only to feel his clogged mana pathways clear up in seconds, realizing Belinda just executed a Grandmaster-level medical technique that requires terrifying aura control. Staring at his head made as dark blue energy swirls around her, wondering why a high-tier operative is pretending to be a countryside maid for his family. Though with the Shadow Syndicate closing in, he isn't about to complain about having secret heavy hitters on his payroll. As Belinda looks him in the eye, asking point-blank why he risked an entire domain war just to extort 20,000 gold from Lady Amelia, and Ghislain deadass replies that he needed funds, and Amelia was the only rich person he knew, which causes Fergus to practically jump out of his plate armor in sheer panic. So Ghislain gives them a calm, confident look, assuring them that Amelia is far too terrified of her father discovering her illegal front to say a single word, causing Belinda to squint in disbelief, asking what project could possibly require a fortune that large. And the second the words leave her mouth, the dark, untamed woods of the monster domain loom in their minds, as Ghislain announces that he is going to pioneer the forest of beasts, sending Fergus springing out of his seat in total horror, reminding his young master that every noble generation since his great-grandfather has died trying to claim that death zone. But Ghislain just cuts him off, asking about the errand he assigned him earlier, which makes Fergus hesitate, confirming he located the target, but warning that the man's current state is questionable at best. And when Ghislain orders the carriage to head there immediately, Belinda tries to shut it down, arguing that a wounded noble shouldn't be wandering around, flexing her fist as she offers to personally eliminate any Rayfold assassins that come their way. But Ghislain shuts her down cold, explaining that while her combat skills are great, she isn't a vanguard commander. As the carriage pulls up to a rotting, neglected wooden lodge hidden deep in the forest, where Ghislain steps out and knocks on the weathered door. And as the wooden frame creaks open into the damp air, a disheveled old man with long white hair and a massive beard peers out from the gloom, leaving Belinda whispering in Ghislain's ear that this washed-up hermit looks like he wouldn't survive till tomorrow, let alone lead a front line. While the old man glares at them from the threshold, growling at the young noble to stop wasting his time and get lost, until his left eye suddenly flares with a brilliant blue mana aura, instantly recognizing Ghislain's presence as Gillian, the former captain of the Ratatosk mercenaries, with the old warrior's tired expression melting into profound emotion as he admits he has waited years for this exact moment. And Ghislain extends an open hand toward the veteran commander, offering him the chance to reclaim his legacy as the chief vanguard of House Perdium. And the second Fergus hears the name of the Ratatosk mercenaries, his jaw drops like he just got hit with a surprise tax audit, because back in the day, you couldn't even apply to this guild unless you had maxed out every single weapon skill tree in the game, which made them the most feared vanguard on the entire continent, a squad of walking war crimes whose reputation survived long after the guild itself dissolved into history. And the man who stood at the absolute top of those monsters was none other than Gillian, the legendary captain who disappeared into these woods years ago, which is why Ghislain isn't standing here to pick a fight, extending his bare hand toward the old veteran like a man offering an empire, ready to rewrite a history that should have ended in blood and ruin. Because before Ghislain can even finish his sentence, a massive battle axe cuts through the air with enough force to split a house in half, passing within inches of Ghislain's face without making him flinch for a single microsecond, while Fergus and the guards behind him look like they just saw their lives flash before their eyes. As Gillian drops his weight into a low stance, channeling heavy blue mana into his grip and recognizing that this kid isn't some lost noble who wandered into the wrong woods, glaring through his matted hair with bloodshot eyes, demanding to know what business a Perdium noble has on his doorstep, forcing Belinda to immediately step out in front, pulling her dagger with dark aura flaring, because she can tell this old man is operating on pure, unhinged grief, and zero instinct for self-preservation. But Ghislain gently bypasses her guard, raising his voice just enough to cut through the heavy pressure in the cabin as he drops the one name that stops the old captain in his tracks. Eternal punishment. Locking eyes with the broken veteran and asking if a guaranteed cure for his daughter's terminal affliction is enough to buy 5 minutes of his time. Because eternal punishment wasn't just a regular sickness. It was a horrific plague that started with a burning fever, forced the victim to cough up black blood, and covered their entire body in crimson spots like blooming flowers. Writhing on the floor in such pure agony that the church officially labeled it a divine curse from the gods, claiming no holy magic on earth could ever reverse it. And in Ghislain's past timeline, Gillian sat right here in this dark room, watching his daughter Rachel scream until her heart gave out, leaving him with nothing, holding her lifeless body in the dark before taking his own life the exact same night. But looking at the girl still breathing on the bed right now, Ghislain knows he made it here just in time. Realizing that every single coin Gillian ever earned leading the strongest mercenary group on the continent was liquidated just to buy useless medicine from fraud priests. While his daughter wept in his arms begging for death just to make the burning stop, which means Ghislain doesn't have a single second to waste on political small talk. Stripping off his heavy travel coat so he can get to work, until a sharp hand grabs him by the shoulder. As Belinda pulls him back with genuine concern in her eyes, pleading with her master to step away from a biological death sentence. Reminding him that if the high priests of the Holy Order called this an incurable divine judgment, no amount of noble authority or physical strength can change the outcome. But Ghislain just draws his small utility blade with a cold smirk, asking her if she meant it when she swore her total trust to him earlier today, leaving the shadow made completely speechless. As he hands her a crumpled piece of parchment with a precise list of ingredients, ordering her to sprint to the nearest market and buy every single item on the paper immediately. And the second Belinda glances at the list, her eyes widen in shock because she recognizes the rare herbs Ghislain just demanded, proving once again that for a mercenary who survived 100 battlefields, obscure knowledge is the difference between life and death. Sitting down at the cluttered workbench to organize his tools, Ghislain remembers how in his future timeline, a simple alchemy breakthrough proved eternal punishment wasn't a divine curse at all, but a specific parasitic toxin. And the reason nobody figured it out for centuries was because the primary catalyst required an insanely expensive, glowing herb known as the fairy's blessing, which Ghislain carefully chops into fine powder alongside the supporting herbs, packing the mixture tightly into a glass container before pouring high-proof distilled alcohol directly over the plant matter. Shaking the jar until the liquid turns into a brilliant, glowing purple solution while Gillian and the retainers watch from the dark corners of the room like men watching a miracle being manufactured in real time. Holding up the finished purple elixir, Ghislain turns around and hands the small glass vial straight to the trembling father, telling him to pour it down her throat right now. And Gillian doesn't even hesitate, lifting Rachel's limp head with his massive scarred hands and carefully trickling the shimmering liquid past her lips. And within seconds, the dark red lesions burning across her face begin to shrink, dissolve, and vanish into clean skin like snow under hot sunlight. Her ragged, agonizing gasps smoothing out into a quiet, peaceful breathing rhythm as the internal heat completely breaks, leaving Belinda gasping in utter disbelief while Gillian clutches his daughter to his chest, tears streaming down his ragged beard as he stammers out her name. While Ghislain just stands over them with the unbothered composure of a man who already calculated the result 3 days ago, leaving the veteran captain staring up at him like he's looking at a god, explaining that holy priests failed because divine magic only amps the body's natural stamina to fight off regular sickness, which is completely useless against a toxin that destroys the internal organs from the inside out. And as Gillian's trembling hands reach toward Ghislain's waist in pure, unadulterated shock, asking if his child will truly survive, Ghislain promises that 2 months of this herbal regimen will grant 100% recovery, guaranteeing her life without asking for a single coin in return, leaving the old warrior completely shattered on his knees. Hunched over on the wooden floor, Gillian looks up through his tears and asks what price a noble of House Perdium demands for delivering a miracle, offering to become his personal attack dog or sign away his freedom as an unconditional slave for the rest of his natural life. But Ghislain looks down with cold clarity, shutting down the slave talk instantly because he doesn't need a broken servant. He needs Gillian, the legendary captain of the Ratatosk mercenaries, extending his open hand to pull the veteran out of the dirt once and for all. And looking into Ghislain's glowing blue eyes, Gillian sees an ancient, unyielding aura that doesn't belong to a 14-year-old kid, recognizing the gaze of a true conqueror.
I gotta tell you, it was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
And without saying another word, Gillian grabs his own massive white hair braid, slamming an axe handle right across the base, severing his long braid and letting it drop to the floorboards, symbolic of discarding his ruined past and burying the broken hermit who waited here to die. As Ghislain shoves his hands into his pockets, standing tall in the center of the cabin, while Fergus and the young guard stare in total silence at the physical shift in the room. Feeling the sudden, suffocating surge of battle-hardened aura radiating off the old captain, who looks entirely different from the washed-up bum they met 10 minutes ago. As blue mana ripples across Gillian's massive shoulders, turning his back on the group and stepping heavily across the wooden floor. asking Ghislaine in a low growl if anyone else followed their carriage into these woods, to which Ghislaine calmly replies that they came alone. Before Gillian asks if there is anyone currently targeting the young master's life, and Ghislaine smirks, admitting he has plenty of enemies right now and plans to make a lot more very soon. And the moment those words leave Ghislaine's mouth, Gillian grips his heavy wooden staff, channeling a violent burst of blue energy through his arms, swinging the weapon straight upward into the dark rafters with enough momentum to cause a structural explosion, shattering the ceiling timber and sending wood splinters flying across the room as a dark shadow gets flushed out of the hiding spot. Because Gillian's keen senses caught a heavy line wrapped around a hidden watcher who thought he was invisible, yanking the thick rope with force that snaps support beams in half, dragging down a bloodied, hooded operative from Lady Amelia's Wildcat Strike Squad, who was secretly tracking Ghislaine to set up the ravine ambush, slamming the spy face first onto the wooden floorboards and pinning his neck under a vice-like grip before he can even pull a blade, interrogating the suffocating assassin while Ghislaine walks over calmly, noting that he already knows this trash was sent by the Witch of the North, resting his hand on his sword hilt, remarking that he didn't want to stain his blade on a day meant for celebration, until Gillian raises a massive hand to block his path, looking up with dark, murderous eyes and asking his new master to leave this trash dam. And with a single brutal twist of his arm, a crimson slash cuts across the sky outside, liquidating Amelia's covert spy before he can leak a single word back to his handler, leaving Belinda watching from the corner with wide, wary eyes, disturbed by how effortlessly this veteran executed a high-level assassin without a shred of hesitation, internally questioning why her young master is intentionally surrounding himself with monsters who operate outside the law, as Gillian drops to one knee before Ghislaine, lowering his head in absolute, unshakable fealty, declaring that from this moment on, his blade and his life belong entirely to House Perdium. And Ghislaine looks down with complete satisfaction, knowing that by saving a dying girl, he just secured the ultimate vanguard commander required to conquer the forest of beasts and rebuild his domain, locking his gaze forward with an arrogant, villainous smirk as he welcomes the mercenary captain to his inner circle, ready to show the entire continent what happens when you try to back a regressed monster into a corner. Deep inside a secluded swamp cabin under heavy rain, a syndicate operative drops the news that their advanced scout was just wiped out, which instantly sends a wave of panic through the room until Captain Vigo growls at everyone to shut their mouths before they blow their location. And a masked scout stammers out that according to Bernafa's intel, Ghislaine shouldn't have had the specs to track a scout, unless Gillian joined his squad. And the second that name leaves his mouth, Vigo snaps, snatching the dude by his throat like a squeaking chew toy, squeezing the living air out of his lungs while demanding to know if his eyes are actually working. As a blood-red glare ignites behind his mask, realizing his former captain is finally stepping back into the game. While miles away in the pitch-black mountain pass connecting Rayfold and Perdium, Ghislaine's convoy moves through the storm. And inside the lead carriage, Gillian's daughter Rachel is practically suffocating because her seat is surrounded by enough heavy weaponry to overthrow a kingdom. Wondering why on earth Ghislaine let her dad bring an entire military surplus store for a simple escort job, though Ghislaine just smiles back casually, pointing out that buying a second carriage was already on the budget to ensure her comfort anyway. As the horses push deeper into a narrow, vertical cliffside rift that practically begs for a high-ground ambush, and head-maid Belinda leans in close, confirming that the operative Gillian dropped back at the cabin was definitely sent by Lady Amelia, identifying the guy's cat mask as the official mark of the Wildcat Traffickers, a major underworld guild operating out of Rayfold, explaining how this shadow guild handles every filthy contract from human trafficking to targeted hits, staffing their ranks with rogue mercenaries, which causes Ghislaine to hit her with a side-eye, asking how a simple castle maid possesses detailed intelligence on high-tier crime syndicates. And our silver-haired SSS-tier baddie instantly panics, stumbling over her words and claiming she just picked up rumors before getting hired. So Ghislaine just leans back completely unbothered, knowing that whatever strike team comes down this path is walking into a meat grinder. When right on cue, a high-density magic projectile comes screaming down from the cliff tops directly toward the lead wagon, only for Gillian to spring off the driver's bench, swinging his weapon with enough force to detonate the blast into harmless sparks, as Ghislaine instantly registers the foot soldiers rushing out of the dark tree line, vaulting straight onto a charger and parrying an assassin's dagger mid-flight with zero wasted movement, before driving his blade clean through the guy's torso, painting the dirt with dark crimson, and following up with a brutal downward axe swing that clears the entire left flank in 1 second, leaving the remaining Wildcats stumbling over their own dead momentum. While further down the narrow path, a massive log crashes directly onto the trail, sending the supply horses into violent panic, pinning the rear wagon in a tight choke point as Fergus braces himself with his axe drawn, which Ghislaine already mapped out in his head, knowing a shadow guild wouldn't leave a secondary road unguarded. As Vigo himself steps out from the shadowed tree line surrounded by armored Wildcat operatives, staring down Gillian and mocking him as a washed-up coward who abandoned his mercenary band just to play nursemaid to a sick kid. And Gillian literally looks this dude in the face with total deadpan apathy, telling him he has no idea who he is, which sets off Vigo's ego like a bomb, complaining about his ruined career like my ex holding onto a screenshot from 3 years ago, screaming at his men to swarm the wagon and slaughter every single person standing near the wheels. So when Ghislaine offers to step in, Gillian tells his young master to sit back and take a break because this hit is personal, igniting a dense blue aura through his heavy axe and cleaving through the front line like wet cardboard, while Ghislain leaps off his mount to handle the secondary pincer team closing in from behind, landing smooth on his feet and parrying a short sword before driving his axe through two attackers simultaneously, catching a dagger strike on his armored gauntlet and immediately returning a lethal strike to the throat, forcing Vigo to realize this kid isn't standard noble baggage and commanding his forces to split up into a two-pronged pincer, to which Ghislain just scoffs, digging his boots into his horse and charging straight into the center of their line, leaving the Wildcats panicking as he unslings a heavy polearm, prepping a wide sweeping arc, using the charger's raw momentum to swing a blue aura blade in a 360-degree kill zone, turning their numerical advantage into an instant meat grinder, as the senior assassin screams at the squad to stop charging him head-on and target the horse's legs instead, only for Ghislain to whip the mount around on a dime, sweeping through three more assassins before they even set their feet. Meanwhile, Vigo drops from the high rocks like a falling anvil, targeting the supply wagon, aiming a lethal dive attack directly at Gillian's mount to force the veteran onto the ground, screaming that since Gillian ruined his life, he won't let him ruin this contract, bringing twin curved daggers down with enough force to cut through solid iron, slicing Gillian's horse out from under him and sending the cart crashing violently into the dirt, only for Gillian to roll out of the wreckage unharmed, raising a glowing blue shield to block the killer blow, absorbing the entire kinetic shockwave and detonating his aura to send Vigo flying backward across the dirt, leaving Vigo skidding on his knees in shock, yelling at him to stop playing dumb when he's clearly fighting like a grandmaster. To which Gillian looks down on his former peer with cold disgust, declaring that the mercenary captain died years ago, and that he exists now solely as young Lord Ghislain's subordinate, sending Vigo into an ultimate crash-out as his red eye blazes, while a hidden Wildcat assassin drops from the dark canopy directly above Ghislain's head, lunging with a dagger while screaming a desperate death threat. Sparks scatter into the pitch-black rain, as Captain Vigo presses his curved daggers straight into Gillian's heavy shield, screaming about how the Ratatosk mercenaries fell apart the second Gillian walked away, leaving his entire squad without a purpose, forced into the criminal underworld just to eat, while Gillian stands behind his guard in total silence, parrying the wild strikes with heavy defensive footwork before swinging a countercleave that forces Vigo to scatter backward, only for the assassin to immediately launch a barrage of blue aura projectiles straight at Gillian's shield, demanding to know why the legendary captain threw away his pride just to become a noble's leash-bound dog, his single red eye blazing with pure unhinged rage as he coats his claws in dark mana, firing another volley of razor-sharp energy blades down at the wagon, which Gillian absorbs without taking a single step back, leaving the metallic needles embedded uselessly in the dirt. So Vigo lunges through the smoke, driving both daggers down toward Gillian's neck, taunting him that whatever prime power he had years ago is dead, and claiming that while Gillian was wasting time trying to cure his sick daughter, he was out here surviving real battlefields, kicking off the earth to drop an airborne execution from above, letting three metallic spikes slam right into Gillian's shoulder armor, expecting the veteran to break under the pressure, but Gillian doesn't even flinch, as Vigo comes screaming down with everything he's got, thinking he's finally secured the kill, only for Gillian to reach up and catch the bare dagger blade with his mana-coated gauntlet, stopping the strike cold in midair while asking him if this pathetic grudge is really the whole reason he's crashing out, leaving Vigo staring in horror as he realizes Gillian wasn't even using 10% of his actual power until now. And before Vigo can adjust his posture, Gillian releases a blue aura shockwave that sends him skidding across the mud, closing the gap with a massive beam impact that shatters the surrounding timber, recovering his footing while Gillian calmly steps out of the dust, pointing out the glaring flaw in his logic, asking why Vigo didn't just track him down and slit his throat years ago if he hated him so much, which Vigo spits up blood and laughs bitterly, admitting he did visit that dilapidated cabin in the woods, showing a dark memory of Gillian sitting broken among dusty weapons while his daughter was dying, proving Vigo walked away back then because slaughtering a spiritless old man offered zero satisfaction. And now Vigo glares through his cracked mask, demanding a real fight against the commander he used to look up to, which makes Gillian grip his heavy battle axe, realizing that even though he pledged his life to Ghislain, he owes his former subordinate the ultimate sign of respect by dropping the dad persona and standing tall as the captain of Ratatosk, locking his cold blue eyes onto Vigo with lethal conviction, while Ghislain steps into the clearing, drawing his blade with a cold smirk because he knows this fight is finally getting serious. And Vigo laughs like a complete lunatic, finally getting the duel he prayed for, as both men trade high-speed aura strikes in a blur of light, until Gillian bypasses Vigo's wild guard, driving his heavy axe straight through his armor, pinning the Wildcat leader to the dirt while Vigo screams out in agony as his life drains away, with Gillian bringing down the final strike in a flash of purple and blue mana, looking down at the bloodied wolf mask to offer his fallen comrade a solemn warrior's eulogy, carving Vigo Villanos' name into his memory as the man gasps his final breath, followed by a violent burst of blood across the screen as the contract is permanently closed, leaving Vigo's dagger sitting in a dark pool of blood until Gillian reaches down to pick it up, standing over the corpse in total silence before turning around to report to his master. As Ghislain and Belinda walk up through the bodies, with Ghislain casually apologizing for letting the fight drag on, while mentally marveling at Gillian's raw combat dominance, remembering how in his past life as the Mercenary King, stories of Gillian's squad were what inspired him to rise to power in the first place. Asking Gillian if he recognized the attacker, to which Gillian looks at the bloodstained dagger and gazes up at the full moon, softly confirming that Vigo was his old brother-in-arms, which makes Ghislain look up at the night sky in deep thought, realizing that all his future allies from his past life are currently wandering the continent right now, resolving to track them down and recruit them before they end up dead, before instantly switching gears to follow Belinda's suggestion about stripping the bodies for pocket change. And 2 days later, the supply wagon finally crosses the border into the rugged hills of Perdium territory, where Ghislain stretches his arms in the wagon, confirming they've finally reached home, reflecting on how he thought he could return whenever he wanted back when he ran away as a brat, while Gillian drives the cart in quiet contemplation. So Ghislain asks Gillian what he thinks of the domain, and when Gillian stammers out a polite lie, Ghislain roasts his own land faster than my self-esteem tanked when my card declined at the drive-thru, pointing out the empty, uncultivated fields where every single farmer was forcefully conscripted into regional wars, leaving the economy in ruin while Belinda watches Gillian's grim reaction, which prompts Ghislain to look both of them in the eye, declaring that he needs their raw military power to fix this entire broken territory, mapping out his internal strategy to purge every single parasite connected to Duke Delphine, until Belinda suddenly gasps and points toward the horizon, making Ghislain's eyes widen in shock as the grand silhouette of Castle Perdium appears through the mist, instantly triggering a vision of his father Count Perdium in his wolf-crested armor, reminding Ghislain of the heavy legacy he has to protect. Looking up as the jagged Gothic spires of Castle Perdium pierce through the mist. And there he stands, Count Perdium in his full wolf-crested plate armor, looking down at Ghislain like a mountain of pure authority. While inside the war chamber, the High Council is already locking horns, arguing that cutbacks are necessary to keep the front lines from caving in. Which brings us right into the strategy room, where Ghislain sits quietly across from the domain elders, as Administrator Homern drops the bomb that Rayfold territory cut off their funding while secretly hoarding military grain and drafting recruits, leaving Ghislain to sit there with his hands folded, listening to them panic about rebuilding the monster garrison while thinking to himself that political squabbling never changes. And looking at Knight Captain Randolph, Treasurer Albert, and General Administrator Homern sitting in a row, Ghislain realizes that while only a few months have passed for his 14-year-old body, decades of blood and war have aged his soul into the mercenary king. So he steps into the private study to face his father, Count Zwalter Perdium, recalling how as a kid he resented this man for being an unyielding wall of strict rules. Yet now, viewing him through the eyes of a veteran commander, he sees the crushing aura of pure exhaustion weighing down his father's shoulders. As the Count takes a slow sip of tea, asking where his son disappeared for an entire week and hoping he didn't start another war, before bringing up the duel against Cain Loges, staring suspicious holes through Ghislain to see if he was gambling away county reputation again, which has Ghislain casually sipping his own tea while scoffing at the word gamble, because extortion is an investment, before getting lectured by Administrator Homern, who looks like he's about to drop from stress, until Treasurer Albert slams his book down to cut off the nagging, turning his focus to Ghislain's recent chaotic movements. And Knight Captain Randolph chimes in with a scowl, asking if the rumors are true about Ghislain executing the traitor bodyguards Jamal and Philip. So Randolph immediately explains that the guards must have killed each other, and Ghislain just snagged the final hit, which Ghislain smoothly agrees with just to protect the captain's fragile ego, letting Randolph feel like a tactical genius while Ghislain's eye flashes blue, knowing he avoided unnecessary internal drama, because Count Perdium cuts right through the politics, reminding everyone that regardless of who delivered the blow, his daughter Elena is safe, marking the first time in 2 lifetimes Ghislain has ever received genuine approval from his father, prompting him to instantly jump on the opportunity and ask for a favor, which triggers the elders into a full rant, as Homern starts listing Ghislain's past offenses faster than my ex listed every mistake I made since 2019 during our argument at Denny's. And after Ghislain dryly acknowledges his wild criminal record, he drops his actual request right on the table, asking for formal permission to pioneer the Forest of Beasts, leaving the entire room frozen in shock as Ghislain holds a deadpan, unbothered stare. And fast forward to his private quarters, Ghislain casually tells Belinda and Gillian that his dad blew a fuse and shouted at the proposal, which Gillian fully backs up, pointing out that diving into the Forest of Death is basically suicide since it's crawling with unmapped horrors. And as Gillian's mind visualizes the pitch-black woods infested with glowing red eyes, Ghislain just nods like he's listening to a basic weather forecast, before casually getting up to walk out, causing Belinda to yell when she realizes he's going to pioneer the death zone anyway, without his dad's permission. So when Belinda desperately begs to know why he's so fixated on a death trap, Ghislain keeps his mouth shut, because leaking the truth right now would trigger chaos. Since buried deep, right near the entrance of that cursed forest lies a secret that can fix his entire domain's bank account. Massive, untouched vein of pure glowing blue runestone, waiting to be claimed, which is the ultimate high-tier mana or that mages across the continent would gladly trade their souls to get. And knowing Duke Delphine used this exact hidden fortune to bankroll his empire in the past timeline, Ghislain smirks knowing he holds the cheat code, causing Belinda to sigh in defeat and fold her hands, pledging her full support to whatever scheme he has cooked up. So Ghislain puts her to work, telling her to take the extorted Rayfold gold and hire a 200-man mercenary army, which makes Gillian step in with a heavy warning, explaining that 200 rogue cutthroats will turn on their boss the second things go south. until Ghislain clarifies that they aren't hiring randoms, but a specific northern unit that makes Gillian's eyes widen in surprise. As Gillian visualizes the terrifying multi-headed hounds of the Cerberus mercenaries, famous for being wild dogs who bite their own masters. And Ghislain just smirks with purple aura flaring, confirming that Cerberus is exactly who he's going after, leading them straight to the muddy crags of Zimbar territory, where Ghislain sits tall on his white horse, ready to put a leash on these wild hounds. Looking down at the sprawling mercenary encampment, as hidden eyes watch them through a brass spyglass, where a hooded scout grins like a hyena, calling Ghislain a rich noble brat ripe for extortion, only for a massive gray gauntlet to reach out of nowhere and grab the scout directly by his skull, as Gillian lifts the man into the air and slams him flat into the mud like a sack of wet flour. And while the surrounding guards freeze in shock, Gillian chokes out the scout while blue aura crackles around his body, before unleashing a shockwave that blows 20 armored mercenaries off their feet like bowling pins, leaving the remaining guards trembling in the dust, staring at this white-haired demon in terror. As alarm bells ring and the camp draws their steel in panic, screaming at this lone tank who just invaded their entire base, until a long-haired officer wearing a dark coat and swinging a heavy chain steps forward, warning them that noble blood won't save them here, walking up with total confidence as his armored squad closes in from both sides, only for Ghislain to trot forward on his horse, cutting through the threat with ice-cold authority, as he looks down at the entire camp with a disrespectful smirk, telling them to shut up and bring him their leader, trotting straight into the middle of the Cerberus base without an invitation, looking at a horde of armed cutthroats like their basic background scenery. And before the guards can even process the disrespect, Ghislain casually demands to speak to whoever is running this circus, earning a cold glare from their chain-wielding officer, who immediately starts whirling a massive spiked flail through the air, laughing off the noble brat's audacity while winding up a lethal strike, and hurls the iron ball directly at Ghislain's skull to teach him a lesson about trespassing. But Ghislain doesn't even bother blinking, because the heavy spiked weapon barely travels 3 feet before a blinding flash of blue energy cuts right through its trajectory. As Gillian steps up from the side, casually thrusting his broadsword straight into the moving chain links to lock the momentum dead in its tracks, which leaves the surrounding mercenaries completely paralyzed in shock, wondering how some old dude just parried a heavy flail with 0 effort. And as the iron ball slams harmlessly into the mud, Ghislain dryly notes that talking is clearly a waste of time, giving Gillian strict orders to suppress the camp without taking lives, prompting the former Ratatas captain to flare a massive wave of blue aura, charging forward to dismantle the entire defensive line single-handedly, deflecting a chain sickle mid-swing before grabbing the attacker by the throat and using him as a human shield, slamming the guard backward into the dirt with enough force to shatter his composure before redirecting the kinetic momentum right into the next wave. When 3 heavily armored veterans charge in together screaming about putting a noble in his place, Gillian doesn't even step back, unleashing precise aura shockwaves through his hilt to knock the weapons out of their hands without spilling a drop of lethal blood, detonating a final kinetic burst across the courtyard that sends armored men flying through the air like bowling pins, leaving the entire vanguard groaning in the mud while the remaining guards cower behind their shields, staring at this white-haired monster in sheer horror, allowing Ghislain to dismount and walk through the wreckage completely unbothered, with Gillian trailing behind, asking how much longer they have to wait for real combat. So Ghislain projects his voice across the quiet camp, telling the extra guards to scram and bring out their boss, which wakes up a red-haired muscular dude inside the main tent, who throws on a dark vest and steps out into the muddy courtyard flanked by his heavy bodyguards, introducing himself as Captain Kair, standing broad-chested amidst the rubble, demanding to know why a random noble is causing a riot outside his quarters. And Ghislain just stands there nonchalantly, explaining that he came to hire them, which makes Kair scoff at the nerve of a client beating up his men first. So Ghislain smoothly responds that this was just his personal greeting to tame them properly, prompting Kair to smirk at the sheer audacity, leading them to a wooden table in the center of camp where Kair sits down and asks what the job is, only for Ghislain to drop 2 words, the Forest of Beasts, specifying that he needs Cerberus to pioneer the monster-infested wasteland, which instantly triggers a wave of panicked murmurs among the watching mercenaries. And when Kair leans in to ask what kind of lunatic would ever push into a death zone like that, Ghislain formally drops his title as the heir of House Perdium, sitting posture perfect across the table while Kair lounges back with his armored guards hovering close behind, before the mercenary captain erupts into hysterical laughter, mocking Ghislain as a greenhouse-raised rookie who has 0 clue what actual monsters look like. So Ghislain places his hand flat on the wood and cold cuts the conversation, signaling that negotiations are over, which causes every guard in the room to draw steel, as a broad-bearded veteran aims an axe right at his head, while Kair leans over the table to ask if the noble kid is shaking in his boots. But Ghislain just lets out a dry scoff, calling out the entire Cerberus outfit as a total hoax before standing up from his seat, prompting Kair to slam his heavy boot on the table, growling that mercenaries don't waste time on suicide runs that don't yield massive profit, only for Ghislain to smirk right back, remarking that weaklings are always the first ones to spout pathetic excuses, dropping the room into dead silence. And as Kair tries to brush it off by demanding compensation money before kicking him out, Ghislain's eyes narrow into razor slits, officially issuing a formal challenge for Mortana's recognition, which causes the veteran mercenary elder in the back to completely freeze in shock, forcing Kair to lock eyes with him in dead seriousness, asking if a noble even comprehends the weight of what he just requested. Referencing the ancient underworld ritual where two fighters enter a drawn circle with 0 mana, single daggers, and their off-wrists bound together with rope. Where stepping outside the line means instant forfeit, trapping both men in a claustrophobic bloodbath that usually leaves even the victor mortally wounded. And as Ghislain spells out the final rule, that the loser becomes the winner's dog, the white-bearded elder panics internally over how a young noble knows this savage custom. Realizing that rejecting a Mortana challenge in front of his warband would brand Kair a coward and strip away his command forever, leaving him completely trapped, which causes Kair's expression to twist into a predatory grin as he turns to his men, shouting that they have a bold little noble eager to play by mercenary rules, his eyes glowing red with pure bloodlust as the entire camp erupts into manic cheers, eager to see a noble get slaughtered. So both men step into the central ring while a thick, knotted rope binds their wrists together, locking them in permanent physical contact. And as the crowd roars for Kair to gut the brat, the mercenary captain taunts Ghislain, telling him there's no backing out of a binding death match. But before Kair can even finish his sentence, Ghislain yanks the rope taut and lunges forward, whispering that he's already survived this duel 5 times, closing the distance until their faces are inches apart, sending a sudden chill down Kair's spine as his smirk completely vanishes, leaving the mercenary captain stammering in utter confusion at the claim, unable to find a single trace of hesitation in the kid's posture. As Ghislain looks up with the cold, ancient eyes of the mercenary king, dropping the ultimate flex that he's actually executed this exact bloody ritual over 100 times in his past life. And Kair stands there thoroughly baffled after hearing Ghislain claim he survived this death match 5 times, looking up at the towering mercenary captain with cold blue eyes that carry the weight of a hardened veteran. Before both men explode back into motion, teeth bared as raw survival instinct overrides whatever nobility Ghislain left at the front gate, their blades clashing in tight, brutal arcs while their bound wrists lock them into a claustrophobic death trap. With Ghislain driving his short dagger straight down, his eyes locked in total concentration as he looks for any gap in Kair's posture. Because without mana protection, every single parry sends a deep, bone-rattling shockwave right up his arms, forcing him to weave through the narrow dirt circle like a man dancing on a razor's edge. As Kair throws a heavy horizontal slash that forces Ghislain to dip his shoulder, ducking underneath the swinging iron by mere inches, only to drive a heavy kick directly into Kair's ribs, using the physical rebound to reset his footwork, which barely even budges the massive captain, who just sneers down at Ghislain and mocks him for trying to lie about his combat record, thrusting his dagger forward in a heavy strike, while telling the young lord that if he's going to bluff, he needs to make it convincing, sending the surrounding mercenary crowd into a wild frenzy as they cheer for their captain to gut the noble brat where he stands, while the white-bearded veteran commander watches from the sidelines, grimly concluding that the teenager is trapped in a completely unwinnable setup, because the ring is barely wide enough for a grown man to lie down, and with no mana allowed, pure muscle mass rules supreme. Meaning if things cross the point of no return, Gillian is standing right behind the crowd with his axe ready to step in and handle business. But Ghislain doesn't call for help, instead wrapping his frame around Kair's arm to pivot his body through the air, landing heavily on the packed dirt while his eyes widen from the sheer physical strain racking his unenhanced body, realizing that without mana shielding his organs, taking heavy impacts from a 100-pound weight difference is slowly breaking his frame, which gives Kair all the confidence in the world to step forward and mock Ghislain for looking like a pale ghost, boasting that he already mapped out Ghislain's entire defensive strategy of dodging main strikes and tanking minor blows, pointing out that in a battle of pure endurance, Ghislain's legs are going to give out long before his blade finds a fatal opening, grinning like a villain who just checked his stock portfolio, eager to watch a noble suffer under raw physical reality, swinging his blade in rapid succession to force Ghislain back onto his heels. And as the heavy steel whistles right past Ghislain's neck, the young lord drops his stance into an impossibly low crouch, letting Kair's momentum carry him forward just enough for Ghislain's eyes to lock onto an exposed gap, driving a vicious counterthrust straight up into Kair's midsection without a second of hesitation. Though Kair barely registers the sting, grinning wider as he raises his dagger over Ghislain's head and tells him to meet his maker, bringing the steel down with full force while the surrounding mercenaries hold their breath for the kill, causing Gillian's hand to tighten on his weapon, right as Ghislain lets out a calm, chilling smirk, fluidly slipping underneath the descending blade from an angle that shouldn't even be mechanically possible with bound wrists, and slicing deep across Kair's exposed flank, opening up a crimson line that turns the entire crowd silent, following the motion through with cold, mechanical precision before Kair can even process the pain, leaving the captain staring down at his own bleeding side in total shock as the realization hits, while the veteran commander in the crowd loses his mind, unable to comprehend how a scrawny teenager just outmaneuvered their leader, as Ghislain drives his hilt right into Kair's chest, spilling enough red juice that I'm half convinced YouTube's monetization bots are about to yellow dollar this entire video. And as the mercenaries panic over their boss getting carved up again, the white-haired commander yells for Kair to stop playing around. So Kair lunges with a desperate swing, only for Ghislain to crack him across the jaw with the heavy pommel of his knife, snapping Kair's head back before flowing directly into a brutal follow-up strike, driving his blade straight through Kair's forearm and pinning his limb in a spray of blood. leaving the giant panting in sheer horror, screaming at Ghislaine to explain how he suddenly transformed into an unstoppable demon. While Ghislaine simply catches his breath, knowing that Kair's reliance on brute force made his muscles rigid and predictable, allowing Ghislaine to stop fighting the giant's power and instead redirect Kair's own momentum against him, a dynamic that leaves the veteran observer thoroughly stunned. As Kair stands there bleeding and exhausted, his own men shouting at him to pull it together, which prompts Ghislaine to casually compliment Kair for not breaking the no-mana rule when cornered, earning a defiant grin from the battered captain. Before Ghislaine admits that while a frontal power struggle favors the bigger man, this duel was never going to be decided by power alone, causing Kair's eyes to snap wide as he realizes there's another way to end this match right now. Recalling the fundamental condition of Mortana's recognition, the second any part of your body touches the dirt outside the drawn circle, you lose. And charging forward like a runaway freight train, throwing his entire bodily weight into Ghislaine to launch him clear over the boundary line, screaming victory as he expects the young noble to crash onto the grass outside. Except Ghislaine doesn't fight the push, instead using the heavy rope bound around their wrists to pull himself closer, inverting his entire body midair like a master acrobat leveraging a heavy anchor, wrapping his leg firmly around Kair's torso while gripping his arm with an iron grip, pivoting his weight around Kair's center of gravity to completely invert their positions, and driving the massive mercenary captain face first into the dirt with a brutal, bone-crunching slam, leaving Kair pinned uselessly to the floor inside the boundary line while the surrounding mercenaries stare in absolute horror. As Ghislaine looks down at his defeated opponent and formally declares his victory, leaving Kair stammering in disbelief over who this kid actually is. So Ghislaine leans in close, his eye gleaming with terrifying authority as he reminds Kair to fix his tone when speaking to his new master. And when Kair asks what else he could possibly want now that the fight is over, Ghislaine coldly informs him that the ritual isn't complete, looking down at the broken captain with a ruthless smirk, preparing to physically toss him out of the ring to make his humiliation complete. Without a single microsecond of hesitation, Ghislaine locks his gaze onto the broken mercenary leader with the cold, calculated precision of an executioner, driving his bare knuckle straight into Kair's jaw before the man can even process the shift in gravity, announcing that the formal beatdown of his new employee has officially begun, mounting Kair's chest inside the narrow dirt circle and pinning him to the earth, while the surrounding warband gasps in terror, watching their feared captain scream out for a merciful pause, which Ghislaine answers by raining down heavy, rhythmic strikes directly into the man's skull, reminding him that complaining about ring boundaries in a fight is the fastest way to get buried in a real war. And when Kair tries to spit out bitter insults about noble honor through a mouth full of blood, Ghislaine cuts him off mid-sentence with another brutal left hook to remind him who owns his contract, shattering whatever fragile ego the mercenary captain had left as heavy fists continue to connect with horrific consistency, forcing the veteran warband on the perimeter to start whispering in sheer panic, realizing their invincible leader is getting systematically dismantled by a 14-year-old kid, until Kair completely crashes out from the pain, shrieking at his men to drop the sacred duel rules and murder Ghislaine on the spot. So 3 armored veterans draw their steel and charge into the ring to break up the beatdown, only for a massive shadow to completely block their path before they can step 2 inches forward. As Gillian steps into the fray, raising his double-headed battle axe in one gauntlet hand and issuing a lethal ultimatum that echoes across the entire encampment, flaring a heavy wall of dark purple aura that instantly freezes the soldiers in their tracks, making every single one of them realize that intervening means immediate execution, leaving Kair lying helpless in the dirt, bruised, bloody, and entirely abandoned by the warband he thought would die for him. Which is when Ghislaine finally stops punching, looking down into Kair's swollen eyes to calmly ask if he's done throwing his pathetic temper tantrum. And in this moment of dazed agony, Kair's consciousness slips backward into his memories, recalling every single highborn noble he had previously broken and extorted throughout his brutal career. Remembering how every aristocrat he ever encountered was nothing more than a greedy, overconfident fraud waiting to be bled dry for gold. How a simple display of violence used to bring whole noble houses to their knees, filling his pockets with easy riches while he laughed at their sniveling weakness, earning him the terrifying moniker of Mad Dog across the northern domains, which makes his current reality feel like a fever dream as he realizes he's being subjugated by a kid who hasn't even hit his growth spurt. And back in the real world, Ghislaine is still holding Kair's limp arm like a heavy sack of grain while the surrounding mercenaries panic, convinced their captain is going to bleed out in the dirt. So Ghislaine casually turns toward the crowd and barks out directives for water, bandages, and clean towels, treating the warband like his personal room service. And when the soldiers hesitate in confusion, Ghislaine dryly points out that their commander is about 30 seconds away from meeting his ancestors if they don't move their feet, scrambling the entire squad into a frantic sprint to fetch medical gear while the white-haired veteran commander watches from the shadow of the palisade, marveling at the fact that these notoriously unmanageable killers are executing the young lord's commands without a single word of pushback. Because Ghislaine understood the fundamental law of the underworld better than anyone. In a culture built on raw strength, establish dominance with your fists first, and authority follows naturally, engraving an unshakable hierarchy into the mind of every mercenary present, establishing himself as the apex predator in a camp full of wild dogs. Which brings us directly inside the command tent shortly after, where a heavily bandaged Kair sits across a wooden table while Ghislain taps his finger on the official Pioneer contract and demands a signature, prompting the defeated captain to sign the parchment with a bitter scoff before sliding it back across the table with an unbothered, casual here. Only for Ghislain's eye to narrow with dangerous intensity, repeating the word here back to him with enough subtle threat to make Kair's heart drop straight into his boots, forcing the mercenary leader to immediately correct his posture, stammering out a formal apology and promising to work hard as Ghislain reaches out to grab his hand in a tight grip, welcoming him to the family with a pleasant smile that terrifies Kair far more than any physical beating ever could. And a few days later on the sunny outskirts of the Perdium domain, a secondary army of hired mercenaries is gathered near the treeline, grumbling amongst themselves about being dragged out at dawn and complaining about their new employer being a noble kid who probably can't even hold a sword. As a bald swordmaster chuckles in the crowd, telling his buddies that managing a brat lord means they can sit back, do zero work, and collect easy gold, which prompts a massive, shirtless brute named Gordon the Muscle to step into the center of the camp, loudly clapping his hands to gather everyone's attention, boasting to the warband about his tactical genius in recognizing that they need a scary representative to bully their rich teenage boss into paying top dollar, explaining that individual mercenaries always get scammed, but a united front led by a giant freak of nature guarantees maximum profit with minimum effort. And the mercenaries fall for the racket instantly, tossing gold coins straight into Gordon's pouch to secure his services as their union rep, until a scout near the edge of the perimeter shouts out that someone is approaching down the main dirt road, showing a single rider on a white horse making his way toward the encampment from the distant castle, making the mercenaries smirk in satisfaction as they mock the young lord's fine clothing, while Gordon instructs the boys to flex their weapons and build an intimidating atmosphere, cracking his heavy knuckles with an arrogant grin as he prepares to teach this rich kid a harsh lesson about the real world, only for his eye to dilate in sudden shock. Because right behind the lone rider, a heavy division of warhorses emerges from the treeline, ridden by veteran soldiers wearing distinctive dog-snout iron helmets, revealing that Ghislain didn't come alone. He brought the entire Cerberus mercenary syndicate as his personal vanguard, leaving Gordon and his crew sweating profusely in utter horror as they realize the most unhinged, bloodthirsty warband in the northern domains is casually riding behind a 14-year-old noble. And Ghislain rides his mount straight up to the petrified musclehead, looking down from the saddle with total, unbothered composure, asking with a calm voice if he's the representative of this secondary unit, making Gordon stammer out a terrified, "Why yes, sir," before Ghislain casually asks for his name, to which the sweating brute responds, "Gordon the Muscle," prompting Ghislain to give him a deadpan compliment about his name, before formally announcing his identity as Ghislain Perdium, Lord of the Territory, while the entire crowd of mercenaries watches their scam fall apart in real time. And Ghislain looks down at the trembling representative with a cold, iron gaze, issuing one simple command: gather the mercenaries, Gordon. Under a pale sky right on the border of the Forest of Beasts, Ghislain steps out of the main staging tent alongside Belinda, confirming that every last logistical detail for their pioneer expedition is officially wrapped up, from base camp fortifications to resource supply lines, bringing the entire unit into physical formation, where nearly 200 heavily armed Sellswords stand in rank, waiting on their 14-year-old employer to lay out the terms. So Ghislain turns to Belinda for one final headcount, prompting her to list off the numbers, confirming they have a total of 192 men, including 41 broken Cerberus cavalrymen, before Ghislain double-checks their border clearance with Garrison Commander Scoven. And Belinda confirms Scoven is actively covering their tracks so Count Perdium's council won't catch wind, giving Ghislain the green light to call the men to attention, as he steps forward to address the crowd, laying out the raw reality that they are marching straight into a hazardous zone full of undocumented monsters, which immediately sends a wave of panic through the hired hands, prompting an angry scold from Belinda before Ghislain raises a calm hand, giving every hesitant mercenary a chance to walk away right now, but dropping a massive financial hook by promising triple their normal rate if they pull this off, which flips the entire crowd from terrified to utterly eager for the payout, while Belinda looks at Ghislain like my mom looking at my bank account after I spent the rent money on 3 gacha packs. Though Ghislain knows the hidden runestone vein in that forest contains millions, meaning triple pay is pocket change for House Perdium, so he asks Belinda for her trust. And while she reluctantly nods, the veteran mercenaries in the back smirk, realizing this young noble isn't just throwing money around. He has a calculated blueprint, prompting Ghislain to give the final signal to advance straight into the dark timberland, where heavy steel axes start biting into ancient bark, clearing the path and filling carts to pave a proper supply line. And Ghislain doesn't just watch from horseback like a soft aristocrat, grabbing an axe himself to drive the pacing alongside Gordon the Muscle, working until daylight finally cuts through the thick upper canopy, proving his manual hustle is directly accelerating their timeline. So he immediately shouts orders to chop, haul, and dig out tree stumps, keeping the momentum moving forward. Recalling Delphine's stolen development journal from his past life, focusing purely on opening the shortest path straight to the runestone deposit, knowing that securing this specific Manhwa vein will single-handedly fund House Perdium's war machine against the upcoming regional conspiracy, while a few arrogant mercenaries snicker in the back, assuming the young lord's manual labor is just a cheap publicity stunt that will wear off in an hour, causing Belinda to pull Ghislain aside, worried that manual labor makes him look weak to a bunch of ruthless Sellswords. But Ghislaine dismisses her concern, knowing every extra minute spent in this death trap increases their risk of an anomaly. While the red-haired mercenary makes a snide joke about Captain Kayer becoming Ghislaine's obedient dog, only for a massive Cerberus veteran to physically shut his mouth with a blunt strike, keeping the unit disciplined while Ghislaine notes that everything is moving according to plan. Remembering how Duke Delphine conquered the realm in the original timeline and logged this zone to extract its hidden assets, which is why Ghislaine had them stockpile hundreds of specialized lanterns instead of cheap torches, though the unnatural silence in the woods starts making him suspicious. Realizing that reading about a monster's habitat in a journal is very different from facing it in the field, so he orders the men to stay on high alert. As dusk settles and a thick, purple-tinted fog rolls heavy over the dark forest floor, leading two oblivious frontline choppers to laugh off the forest's lethal reputation, feeling almost guilty for getting triple pay for easy logging. Until Gordon the Muscle drops a heavy timber log with a deadpan expression, muttering that someone needs to give him his money back. And when the bald mercenary asks what's wrong, Gordon asks a simple tactical question about the path they just spent hours clearing, pointing out that every single tree they felled over the last 5 miles has quietly reappeared, locking them inside a seamless wall of dense, unbroken timber, leaving the entire rear guard staring at solid wood where an open road should be, realizing the spatial environment itself just shifted around them, prompting Ghislaine to command total silence while drawing his blade, stepping forward into the heavy purple pressure. As panic erupts among the common cellswards who realize the atmosphere has turned hostile, making Ghislaine zero in on Gordon, warning the musclehead that staying near that tree line means immediate death, and ordering him to retreat slowly. And as Gordon takes a terrified, cautious step back, the trunk right next to him twitches, sending a nearby scout flying through the air from an invisible kinetic blow before anyone can even draw a bow, as red glowing eyes ignite inside the bark shadows, revealing an ambush from an entity with zero detectable mana presence. While the rest of the squad loses their composure in terror, Ghislaine remains unmoved, scanning the anomaly. Even as an arrogant bald mercenary steps forward with a laugh, claiming the path is just hidden by repetitive scenery and mocking Ghislaine's caution, prompting Ghislaine to give him one last stern warning to fall back or die, which the bald fool laughs off as fake noble intimidation, only for thick, fibrous tendrils to explode out of the soil, coiling around the bald man's waist before he can finish his sentence, dragging his screaming body backward into the earth as his eyes dilate in sudden, violent panic, yanking him straight down into a gaping, circular maw lined with razor-sharp, white thorns that opens up right inside the tree trunk, exposing a massive, camouflage predator that hides its presence entirely as living wood, leaving Ghislaine standing alone before the towering, wooden beast as a giant, blood-red eye unseals from its dark bark. As Ghislaine locks eyes with the creature without a single trace of hesitation, identifying the apex ambush predator of the northern woods, a pyrus ant. Towering out of the dark timber, the true nightmare of the forest of beasts reveals itself as a massive, gnarled pyrus ant, gaping open a razor-line maw that immediately sends the frontline mercenaries into full-blown panic as they start screaming for their lives, yelling at everyone to run before they get eaten alive, while dark, whip-like tendrils cut through the air with terrifying velocity, snagging one poor soldier mid-stride and yanking him backward off his feet toward the open canopy, dragging him straight into a churning vortex of sharp teeth, while a second monster unseals its glowing red eye right beside the first. Gordon the Muscle gets wrapped up in thick, fibrous vines, screaming for someone to cut him loose. So a nearby comrade raises a heavy battle axe and strikes with everything he's got, only for the steel blade to bounce off the vine like solid iron, leaving the soldier staring in confusion at his unchipped axe, right before the monster yanks Gordon off his feet, launching his massive frame straight up into the air toward the creature's gaping throat while his squad watches helplessly from below, until Ghislaine appears out of nowhere, descending from the sky like an executioner with his longsword wrapped in brilliant blue aura, driving the glowing steel downward in a precise arc targeted directly at the creature's oversized glowing eye, plunging the blade clean into the eye socket and spraying dark blood across the timberline. The massive entity screeches in agony, dropping Gordon onto the dirt, which lets a helmeted mercenary put 2 and 2 together and yell out that the eyes are their weak point, while Gordon scrambles backward on all fours, trembling as Ghislaine lands fluidly without breaking a sweat, immediately turning toward the scattered ranks and barking a command that cuts right through their panic, explaining that spreading out just turns them into easy prey, so they need to raise their shields and form a locked defensive perimeter, prompting Gordon and the front line to lock their heavy iron shields together, blocking every incoming vine strike in the nick of time. With the shield wall holding firm, Ghislaine strides toward the supply wagons and asks Kayer if the oil lamps are ready, getting an instant confirmation from the Cerberus captain. And as more glowing eyes flare through the dark fog, Ghislaine waits for the exact moment the monsters lock onto their position before giving the signal, sending Kayer and the heavy cavalrymen hurling lit glass lanterns through the night sky directly at the target, only for the thick, armored outer bark to absorb the impacts and swat the flames away like mere mosquitoes, leaving Kayer and the veterans frozen in shock as they realize surface fire isn't going to burn through that armored wood, which is when Gillian steps up with his battle axe, unleashing kinetic shockwaves to keep the surrounding tendrils from breaching the line, while Ghislaine orders Gillian and Belinda to protect the throwers while he steps out to personally draw the monster's aggro. Belinda acknowledges the play, watching Ghislain infuse his longsword with a dense layer of refined aura, stepping directly in front of the towering Pyrus Int while Belinda shouts for him to be careful. And Ghislain launches into midair, unleashing a sweeping crescent slash that carves massive wounds into the monster's front plating, weaving through a hail of striking roots with incredible aerial agility to strip away every inch of hardened bark, landing clean cuts across the creature's main body while locking its focus onto his high aura signature. Seeing the giant entities shift their weight and turn toward Ghislain, the shield line starts freaking out, thinking their employer is about to get flattened. But Ghislain uses the opening to drive another aura strike into the exposed core, landing solidly back on the ground, slicing open the soft, moist inner tissue underneath the armored shell before springing backward out of danger. Giving head made Belinda the exact window she was waiting for to order the entire force to unleash their full payload of oil lamps, sending hundreds of burning glass vessels flying across the field to land directly inside the open wounds Ghislain just carved out, igniting the exposed inner flesh in a massive, roaring inferno that consumes the monster from the inside out. Kair and the mercenaries cheer in triumph at the sight, while Ghislain shouts for everyone to keep throwing without stopping, ensuring every single entity gets drenched in flame until the clearing turns into a fiery furnace, leaving the frontline soldiers staring in awe, even as a few begin to worry if they're about to burn down the whole forest. While Gordon wipes the sweat off his face and starts laughing, talking trash about how these monsters are weak because they're just trees, only for Ghislain to hit him with a stone-cold glare, telling everyone not to lower their guard because the real fight is just beginning. A massive column of violent white steam erupts into the night sky, smothering the flames in seconds and blinding the entire clearing, causing the soldiers to stumble back in confusion, wondering if the fire somehow went out on its own while Belinda rushes to Ghislain's side, asking what's happening, which Ghislain answers with deadpan logic, explaining that burning the outer shell released the moisture inside, turning the flesh into raw steam. And as the thick fog clears, the true form of the Pyrus Int reveals itself. A multi-headed, organic abomination glistening with raw muscle fibers and concentric rings of razor-sharp teeth, towering over the advanced team with glowing eyes and an aggressive, pulsing aura that shatters the mercenaries' newfound confidence into pieces. The soldiers scream in horror, realizing their fire trick didn't kill it, and that they're now standing face-to-face with a nightmare. But before a full-blown retreat can trigger, Ghislain steps to the front and raises his blue aura blade straight toward the heavens, his voice ringing out with absolute command as he orders every man in formation to draw their steel, declaring that the long-range setup is officially over and transitioning the entire force into close-quarters combat, charging headfirst into the monster's face with his red cape billowing, leading the vanguard straight into the kill zone, raising his long sword into the dim sky to signal the entire expedition, ordering every cell's word to draw their steel as that multi-headed abomination pulses with dark energy, declaring that long-range tricks are officially over and shifting the entire unit into a full-scale melee assault, leaping directly into the creature's gaping maw without a single second of hesitation, which instantly sends the low-tier mercenaries into a blind panic, because trading blows with a 50-foot organic nightmare was definitely not listed in their contract description. But Kair and his Cerberus cavalry are built different, grinning like maniacs as they dive headfirst into the meat grinder, while Gillian checks the frontline cowardice, reminding the scared extras that defying Ghislain's direct orders carries a much higher mortality rate than any monster, and telling them to lock in, forcing Gordon and the common fodder to realize their only surviving option is following the kid who actually knows what he's doing. As Ghislain shouts the tactical exploit, reminding everyone that burning off the armored bark turned these cosmic horrors into massive, unarmored punching bags. So even regular mercenaries can carve through exposed muscle without needing high-level aura, turning a nightmare raid into a coordinated execution. Because in a high-stakes dungeon dive like this, second-guessing your sword swing is a quick ticket to getting digested. And Ghislain knows his true job as commander isn't just killing beasts, but wiping out fear from his men, driving his aura-coated blade right through the monster's inner ring of teeth to demonstrate how fragile these abominations actually are, showing them that even a suicide mission in the Forest of Death becomes a winnable farm session under proper leadership, until the last titan collapses into the dirt, leaving Ghislain standing alone over a mountain of dead flesh while the surviving mercenaries stare in disbelief, gasping for air after realizing they just cleared a wipe-tier threat without losing a single man, only for Ghislain to coldly order them to fall back into formation, forcing them to quickly stack up on his flank before the blood scent draws every predator in a 5-mile radius. Because this cursed timberland is so hyper-lethal that even the entrance threshold spawns mid-boss level threats as casual random encounters. Yet Ghislain looks them dead in the eye and guarantees he will personally take every single boss aggro on the front lines, promising that as long as they stay glued to his heels, nobody else gets left behind to die, which secures their total submission, turning a panicked mob of Sellswords into an obedient, fanatical army. And over the next few days, they grind through the wilderness nonstop, chopping timber, clearing supply lines, and shredding every beast that jumps them. With Belinda checking on Ghislain's minor scrapes, which is top-tier waifu behavior, taking care of her young lord while giant avian predators swoop from the canopy. And when a massive purple-horned brute ambushes the flank, sending the front line into a temporary panic, Kair instantly lops off its front leg to disrupt its balance, causing the multi-ton body to tip directly toward the infantry. But Gillian drops into a rock-solid stance, catching the falling beast right on his tower shield like a unit, and driving his broadsword straight through its skull before the creature can flatten the vanguard, allowing Ghislain to do a quick head count and confirm 0 casualties, which has these mercenaries locking shields and yelling combat taunts like seasoned veterans, proving that throwing underleveled cells words into high-rank raid zones is actually the fastest way to max out their combat IQ. Though the mental tax of fighting through hell 24/7 starts breaking the weaker-willed troops, leaving this poor dude looking like a college student checking his bank account at Denny's after rent, convinced he joined a death cult, until the dark canopy opens up to reveal a pristine, shimmering lake glowing under the moonlight, prompting thirsty soldiers to break ranks for a drink. And while Belinda rightly senses a potential trap, Ghislain confirms this body of water is the exact coordinate marked in Duke Delphine's journal for the hidden runestone vein, ordering the entire expedition to set up tents and light campfires along the shoreline for a well-deserved rest. But as night falls, a few cells words around the pot start letting their paranoia simmer, with a hooded parasite named Manus trying to incite a mutiny, preaching that running away in the dark is better than dying for noble gold. And when the others point out they're close to the objective, Manus brings up Ghislain's old trash reputation to poison their trust, though the veterans counter that Ghislain already secured their pay and saved their necks multiple times, prompting Manus to push the classic noble propaganda, claiming Ghislain will throw them into monster maws the moment things get ugly, while secretly plotting to use these exact same suckers as meat shields for his own personal escape route, until a kettle hat mercenary shuts him down entirely, pointing across the camp to show what their employer is actually doing, where Ghislain is personally applying top-shelf medical salve to a common foot soldier's wrist, spending high-grade potions that cost more than a commoner's annual wage just to treat a minor scrape, and casually calling for the next man in line without giving a single thought to the financial cost, completely destroying Manus's sedition attempt, because no noble treats their cannon fodder like prized assets unless they genuinely value them, while Ghislain pulls his commanders aside, casually dismissing Kayr's suggestion to execute the mutineer on the spot, and focusing instead on the inventory count of supply lanterns resting on the perimeter crates, noticing that a few lamps vanished and connecting it to the weird fact that monster ambushes suddenly stopped for 2 straight days, which makes Gillian realize the quiet isn't safety, but a signal that they stepped right into an apex predator's hunting grounds, a nocturnal beast so terrifying that all the low-level monsters cleared out of the region just to avoid becoming its dinner, as a cold wind sweeps through the treeline, swallowing the camp's light in pitch-black shadow, and Ghislain's eyes narrow as he realizes the easy part of the expedition is officially over. While the rest of the camp is passed out cold from logging timber all day, Gordon is sitting inside the supply tent trying to catch some sleep, only for his combat instincts to spike, snapping his eyes open the second the ambient air temperature drops, because a lit lantern on a nearby wooden crate literally lifts off the ground by itself, hovering in midair before vanishing straight into the gloom. And as Gordon scrambles backward on the dirt, a shadowy mass covered in glowing red eyes manifests an inch away from his face, sending him bursting through the canvas tent like a madman, swinging his heavy mace at empty air while screaming his head off, which has the surrounding mercenaries looking at him like he totally lost his mind, as he continues swinging at ghosts in the middle of camp, sweating buckets and swearing on his life that an invisible monster was standing directly beside him. But the guards just shake their heads, figuring the bro is sleep-talking because of PTSD from fighting tree abominations. Except Gordon isn't having it, insisting that he watched a solid iron lantern dissolve into thin air right before his eyes. And the mood turns sour fast, because other veterans speak up, admitting they heard eerie, high-pitched laughter echoing out of the treeline, confirming the grim truth that whatever is lurking in the dark has been stalking their perimeter without making a sound, until Ghislain steps out of the command tent, flanked by Gillian and Kayr, looking totally unbothered by the growing panic, and casually calls a full military assembly, because while the commoners are panicking, he already knows what they are dealing with, gathering every squad leader inside the main tent to break down the threat before morale collapses. And while the mercenaries outside freak out about fighting ghosts, Ghislain confirms that this is just standard behavior for this region, identifying these nocturnal predators as Falors, apex hunters of the forest of beasts that attach themselves to the expedition the moment they reach the lake. Monsters capable of merging with pure shadow, making them intangible to physical weapons while they methodically strip away every light source, which leaves the troops horrified, while Kayr grinds his teeth, asking if these creepy bastards are just playing with their food before going for the kill. And when Kayr urges an immediate blind strike into the woods, Ghislain shuts him down, refusing to waste energy running into the dark, explaining that charging aimlessly only feeds their sadistic hunting instincts, causing them to retreat, reset, and bleed the camp dry. So when Gillian asks how they wipe out hundreds of intangible monsters, Ghislain gives a deadpan yes, before turning to Belinda to verify their secret weapon, unsheathing his longsword to draw a detailed tactical map directly into the dirt floor, pointing out how the Falors pack has surrounded them on 3 sides, stealing lanterns to shrink their vision and compress their defensive line, which proves why backing the camp against Luminous Milestone Lake was a high IQ move, eliminating an entire rear flank and giving them full tactical control, carving unit symbols into the ground as he splits their force into 3 specialized groups, assigning heavy shield bearers to the front line, crossbowmen directly behind them, and an elite strike team led by himself, Gillian, Belinda, and Kayr, designating the middle line to absorb the impact, while his elite squad maneuvers around to hammer the exposed left flank with aura firepower. And Kair is out here looking at the dirt map like how my boy looked at his bank account after promising to pay for the group chat's Denny's run, doubting if regular mercenaries can hold against invisible monsters, prompting Belinda to raise her hand, asking how physical weapons are supposed to hit entities made of pure darkness. And while Kair assumes they just need to dump raw mana into their blades, Ghislain looks at his head, made with a confident smirk, revealing the budget secret he set up weeks ago, as the scene shifts out to the eerie, silent night, where the outer perimeter loses its final lantern, leaving the heavy shield wall locked together in pitch-black darkness. And as invisible tendrils whistle through the night air, the pre-regression knowledge from Duke Delphine's journal pays off, reminding us that Falors have one fatal weakness, an extreme vulnerability to concentrated light, which is why Ghislain pulls out a parchment scroll glowing with blue runes, bellowing the signal for Belinda, Gillian, Kair, and 200 mercenaries to tear open their first circle magic scrolls simultaneously, blasting massive pillars of radiant magic energy straight into the midnight sky, as a blinding nova of pure white light erupts across the entire lakeside clearing, instantly stripping away the shadowy mantle and vaporizing the monster concealment in seconds, leaving the shield wall stunned as hundreds of gross, multi-eyed eel monstrosities are exposed in plain daylight. And as the screeching Falors charge in a desperate frenzy, the frontline commander calls for the crossbow units to lock in, unleashing a dense, synchronized volley that pins the monsters in place, while Ghislain readies his blade, Aura, raising his glowing longsword high into the air as the trap closes with zero chance of escape, swinging a massive wave of blue aura through the air, shouting for the assault units to begin the harvest, and leading Gillian, Belinda, and Kair into a glorious flank assault to mop up the remaining frauds, swinging his aura-draped blade directly into the dark mass, bellowing for his Vanguard Council to launch a full countercharge, with Kair grinning like a maniac while slicing through dark tendrils, as Ghislain drives his longsword deep into the core of the shadowy swarm, descending through midair with enough kinetic momentum to shatter a building, identifying these shadowy pests as Falors, whose physical defense is garbage the moment magic light burns away their shadow mantle, meaning his elite vanguard can slice through their soft flesh like warm butter. Setting up a tactical breakdown where Gillian draws the primary aggro with his massive axe, Kair disrupts their flank formation. An SSS tier made Belinda readies her wire blades to carve out lethal openings, leaping into the air to shred through the disoriented front line, until Belinda suddenly spots the bowman losing ground on the edge of the clearing, shouting out to her master in alarm, watching Ghislain dive straight into the deepest cluster of monsters to hold the line, unleashing a colossal arc of blue sword aura that pulverizes a whole wave of Falors in one clean sweep, erupting in a blinding burst of raw kinetic power right where the bowmen were failing, because the contract mercenaries were down to their last bolts, scrambling to reload while getting overrun by shadowy claws, screaming in terror as the shield wall started to splinter under the sheer volume of teeth, only for Ghislain's massive aura blade to come crashing down, crushing the assault vector before anyone gets eaten, as Ghislain steps out of the smoke with his elite council, telling the foot soldiers they held the line well, which instantly reignites their spirit, making them cheer for their employer as he commands them to widen their shield wall into an encirclement ring, turning the tables on the monsters who suddenly realize they're the ones trapped in a trap, forcing the Falors to break ranks and sprint for the timberland, though Ghislain instantly catches onto their tactical retreat, instructing Belinda to locate their horn pack leader who's sending out the signals, explaining to the boys why letting these pests run away is a death sentence. Because nocturnal apex predators will hunt a target for weeks out of pure spite, meaning taking out the commander is the only way to trigger total organizational collapse, which leaves Belinda staring at him in quiet awe, reflecting on how her young master evolved from an unstable kid into a cold, calculating general, pulling her support wires tight and readying her stance without a second thought, swinging through the upper canopy like a high-tier shadow assassin, locking her sharp eyes onto the giant horn monster lurking in the back of the horde, and snagging her grapple hook straight around its skull horn, calling down the exact coordinates to her master, giving Ghislain the exact signal he was waiting for as he charges across the dirt, pushing off the ground with enough raw force to leave a crater, and channeling 3 cores of mana into a massive vertical beam of sword aura that cuts straight through the night sky, bisecting the horned Falor's leader cleanly from mouth to tail in the most disrespectful flex of the entire raid, crashing down as the giant carcass thuds against the floor, turning back to his men with a fierce command, ordering them to slaughter every single disoriented survivor, which triggers a total bloodbath as Kair and his Cerberus cavalry go wild, taunting the old man Gillian to see who gets a higher body count, until the first rays of dawn break over the mountain range, bringing an end to the night-long slaughter, as Ghislain impales the final creature, standing atop a mountain of dead monsters, lowering his blood-stained blade and declaring total victory to his exhausted army, sending the contract mercenaries into tears of joy because they actually survived the nightmare forest, while Belinda checks in on Ghislain's health, prompting him to order a full head count and tell Kair to help haul monster carcasses, explaining to Kair that spreading apex predator corpses around the perimeter creates an organic stench barrier that repels every lower-tier monster in the forest, leaving Kair and Gillian bickering over duty details while Ghislain calculates their 10-day progress through the timberland, checking his strategic map to confirm that every major threat on the route is gone, leaving a clear path to mine the massive runestone vein, When Belinda approaches with the ledger, reporting that all 41 Cerberus cavalry survived without a scratch, but 3 contract mercenaries are missing, causing Ghislaine to assume that seditious rat Manus died somewhere in the chaotic fray, which the other mercenaries scoff at, knowing a snake like Manus literally snuck away during the confusion. And miles away in the deep woods, Manus and his 2 deserter buddies are sprinting for their lives, with Manus screaming at them to keep running before anyone notices they abandon the contract, until the 2 deserters freeze dead in their tracks, trembling as they point right behind Manus's head, where 2 colossal, blood-red eyes materialize out of the pitch-black canopy, leaving Manus staring directly into the maw of an actual deep forest demon with his jaw dropping to the floor in pure, unadulterated terror. Deep inside the untamed zones where frozen crystals pierce directly through thick, armored scales, leaving mounds of bleached skeletons of past explorers who thought they could farm the forest without paying the price in blood. Which brings us right back to the cleared Pioneer Road where timber is crashing down to secure supply routes. And these hired sellswords are sweating like minimum wage laborers on overtime, hauling heavy logs, and clearing brush faster than an IRS tax audit. Which leaves Captain Kayer standing on the ridge in genuine disbelief, watching these usually lazy mercenaries actually coordinate like a disciplined squad without anyone screaming at them. And when Kayer asks Ghislaine if he's going to toss these guys away after the trees are cleared, Ghislaine doesn't even pause his work, casually confirming he plans to lock them all into permanent private contracts. Because in his mind, standard mercenaries usually crumble against a trained army due to 0 fight IQ. But surviving this nightmare forest has upgraded them into the exact loyal framework he needs to expand his power. And right on cue, Gazelle steps up to report that scattering those Fowler's carcasses along the perimeter worked perfectly, keeping every low-tier beast miles away from the supply line. Yet Ghislaine's instincts refuse to settle down, sensing an unmapped danger in the air right before a shout echoes from the canopy above. An SSS tier made Belinda drops down from the trees like a shadow, landing fluidly to report back on what she found up ahead. Her red eyes practically sparkling with excitement as she confirms the target location, catching even Ghislaine off guard. So he instantly commands the entire vanguard to clear the remaining brush with everything they've got, leading them straight toward a misty, blue-tinted grove. And the moment the trees part, Kayer and the veteran officers freeze dead in their tracks, staring into the cavern with their jaws hitting the dirt, while Ghislaine steps into the light, calmly revealing that this massive subterranean vault is the entire reason he dragged them into the forest, an unmined, top-tier runestone vein, where colossal, glowing azure crystals erupt out of the rock face like vertical spires of liquid cash, blinding the expedition in magic light. And while Kayer stammers over the sheer financial value of the cave, Belinda hugs Ghislaine from behind in pure hype, asking how on earth he tracked down a cheat code like this, prompting one extra to start celebrating early about retiring on a yacht, only for Ghislaine to hit him with a bone-chilling NO that drops the room's temperature to 0. His eyes glowing with aura as he warns them that nobody is leaving, right as a mangled, bloody body is violently hurled out of the misty cavern threshold, crashing onto the dirt right before their feet, revealing the shredded remains of Manus, the same rat who tried to desert the camp last night, sending Gordon the Muscle into a full panic as Ghislaine steps past the terrified extras, drawing his heavy blade. And ordering everyone to fall back, he winds up his stance and unleashes a massive horizontal aura slash through the white vapor, clearing the fog in a single sweep to reveal a horrific monster nest piled high with chewed bones, decaying meat, and freshly slaughtered corpses, which leaves the frontline infantry screaming in terror as they realize they just walked into an active feeding ground. And as Gordon points out that half those skeletons belong to human scavengers, Ghislaine coldly notes that getting rich was never going to be hand-fed to them, realizing the only reason he didn't detect this high-tier nest earlier was because toxic corpse gases were masking the predator's territorial odor inside the dense fog. And a sudden wave of alarm hits him as he remembers Duke Delphine's historical journal never mentioned a boss-level threat guarding this specific mine entrance, forcing him to turn and bark combat orders. But before the words even leave his throat, a red-scaled titan known as the Blood Python descends from the dark ceiling, opening a multi-tiered maw lined with rows of razor-sharp fangs, striking downward like a falling skyscraper, leaving Ghislaine with just enough time to scream for his men to scatter before the jaws slam shut. And as the entire command group scrambles to avoid getting crushed, the cavern floor shakes under the force of the strike. So Ghislaine leaps mid-air, channeling blue aura into his longsword to bring an overhead strike directly onto the serpent's snout, detonating a kinetic shockwave across the creature's face in a display of raw power, only to realize his aura-infused blade barely left a superficial scratch against the beast's dense, iron-hard scales, which sends Kayer into a panic, staring in total disbelief that an aura strike from the young lord couldn't even break the armor value on this oversized worm. Right as the serpent retaliates by spewing a pressurized jet of bright green acidic poison straight at his chest, forcing Ghislaine to execute an acrobatic mid-air backflip to avoid getting melted down to the bone. And without missing a single beat, he drives his stance forward, launching a high-speed counterattack against the monster's exposed side. But the blood python whips its muscular tail through the air like a steel beam, crashing directly into Ghislaine's defensive guard, shattering the stone ground beneath them under the weight of pure kinetic mass, and sending Ghislaine hurtling backward into the cavern wall with enough force to cave in solid rock, which leaves Belinda screaming out his name in terror as a dust cloud buries her employer under crushing stone. while the python shifts its aggression back to the main force, sweeping its massive tail across the cavern and sending fully armored mercenaries flying like ragdolls. And the mercenaries lose their minds, scattering in every direction as the beast treats their shield lines like minor speed bumps, with men screaming for help as they get thrown across the cavern, while Belinda readies her wire hooks to draw the beast's focus. And amidst the deafening cries of men begging for a retreat, Ghislain pushes himself up from the skeletal floor, completely unfazed by the impact, his blue eyes blazing through the dust as he realizes this apex terror is the true boss guarding the mine. A deep forest nightmare he originally considered impossible to hunt down at his current level, standing between him and millions of gold in Manhwa. And logically, retreating right now to bring a full military army is the smart play, since his chances of soloing an apex boss with a bunch of terrified extras is lower than my bank balance after rent day, which is looking roughly as pathetic as my last relationship, where I spent my entire paycheck on dinner only to get hit with the "you're like a brother to me" text on the drive home. But Ghislain rejects the retreat because delaying this operation means watching his family get slaughtered all over again. So he refuses to let a glorified overgrown lizard reset his operational timetable, knowing that backing down here renders every sacrifice he made since regressing pointless. And unsealing his third core to its limit, a crackling beam of purple and blue sword aura erupts from his blade, leveling his weapon at the roaring titan to prove that when you've already died once, a giant snake is just target practice. Glaring down the colossal beast with his third core burning like a miniature sun on his chest, warning it not to get in his way. Because when you're carrying the fate of an entire noble house and 100 lives on your shoulders, a giant snake is just an annoying obstacle. And forcing his unsealed third core into overdrive, the sheer kinetic pressure in the cavern spikes as the blood python lets out a deafening roar. Standing tall over a carpet of ancient human skeletons, he vaults off the stone floor and drives his aura-draped blade directly toward the monster's throat, carving a blazing pink arc through the dim light of the runestone cavern, forcing the titan to throw its massive scaled head back. And his blade bites deep into the creature's thick armor, sending a dark fountain of blood spraying across the subterranean walls. But the apex predator counterattacks instantly, whipping its iron-like scaled tail through the air and slamming Ghislain across the stone floor. He grunts through gritted teeth while absorbing the massive shockwave, catching himself in a crouched stance just as the python snaps its razor-sharp fangs open, maneuvering through the debris to strike again, knowing full well that even when the math says a solo victory is borderline impossible, there are moments in command where stepping back isn't an option, carrying the cold weight of a true leader who refuses to let history repeat itself. And as Kair, Gillian, and Belinda stare in breathless shock, Ghislain launches himself right into the jaws of danger, spearheading the vanguard like a man possessed, leaving zero doubt about who actually runs this expedition. Wiping the blood and sweat from his brow, he quickly gauges the python's stance while trying to keep his composure, realizing the giant terror isn't slowing down for a single second despite taking a direct hit to its hide. His dilated irises flicker with raw internal calculation, knowing that running his third core at max output will empty his mana tank long before this monster drops, which is when Belinda and the squad break through the cavern mist, screaming for him to fall back. With Belinda rushing to his side in total panic, begging her employer to retreat to safety while the front line tries to stall the beast, only for Ghislain to hit her with a cold, unyielding command to clear the area immediately, leaving the whole team frozen in utter disbelief. As the veteran shield officer stammers in protest, pointing out that not even a high-tier knight can guarantee survival against a deep forest titan like this. And Ghislain turns around with an unblinking stare, telling them straight to their faces that he simply refuses to lose a single one of them in this pit. So when Belinda tearfully asks what happens to him if they leave, he casually claims he'll just solo the beast right here, leaving her wondering how a 14-year-old keeps pulling off literal miracles. Channeling thick red aura around his broadsword while the python snaps its massive head forward, spewing a pressurized torrent of toxic green acid right at the formation. He shouts at the men to move their asses out of the splash zone before the corrosive fog melts their gear. And the heavy infantry lock their iron shields into a makeshift wall, barely deflecting the burning spray, while Ghislain watches in tense silence. But instead of running for the exit, every single mercenary in the unit plants their boots into the dirt, screaming that they're staying right by his side. With the eye-patch veteran grinning through the smoke, admitting they've never worked for an employer who actually put his own body on the line to keep hired meat shields alive. And Belinda draws her daggers with red eyes blazing, declaring there is zero chance she's abandoning her young master, while the vanguard officers step up to draw the python's focus, asking Ghislain to trust them the same way he expected them to follow him into this monster-infested hellhole, which causes Ghislain to pause, quickly calculating the creature's physical traits: massive mass, lethal venom, and dense crimson scales that bounce standard mana blades like cheap rubber, before clocking the single tactical exploit in its defense, realizing that hitting the wounded right eye he damaged earlier will let them bypass its scale armor. So he raises his massive blade high into the air, its purple edge slicing through the dark cavern mist as he addresses his force, issuing the final operational order for the Forest of Beasts expedition team to make sure every single man returns alive. And the entire force roars back in total devotion, surging forward as Belinda leaps acrobatically into the air to flank the serpent's neck, triggering a full-scale synchronized assault where contract mercenaries and heavy cavalry attack as one disciplined body. with Kair driving his greatsword straight into the exposed flesh, spraying fresh monster blood while Belinda carves through its side. And Gillian anchors the center with his heavy axe, absorbing a tail strike on his tower shield so Ghislain can launch skyward, driving his blade directly into the python's ruined eye socket, reflecting on how regression knowledge only takes you halfway when real battle hits. Knowing that if he doesn't step up right now, everyone who put their faith in him dies in the dark, and refusing to let that future happen on his watch, he channels every last drop of his third core into a towering beam of sword aura, shouting that he is the sole master of this domain's destiny. And descending like a falling meteor, the sheer power of his drop strike leaves the entire squad gasping in awe, as his glowing crimson blade plunges straight through the monster's eye socket into its brain stem, slicing clean through the top of the serpent's skull in a massive explosion of gore. And the colossal titan collapses dead onto the cavern floor, stone debris settling around its massive carcass as the squad stares in total shock. While Ghislain stands tall over the slain apex terror, his dilated irises glowing with power as he declares that the future of Perdium belongs to him. With the violent discharge of kinetic mana finally clearing out of the subterranean cavern, leaving millions in raw azure runestone sitting completely unguarded. And 2 weeks later back at Castle Perdium, a fist slams violently onto the wooden conference table, screaming that a major crime has been committed. As Treasurer Albert loses his mind over Ghislain defying domain orders, while Administrator Homerin rubs his temples, exhausted from managing the fallout of a young lord who acts like he owns the whole region. Especially considering Garrison Commander Scovin is currently sitting in a damp dungeon cell for filing a fake border report just to cover Ghislain's entry, which is honestly a level of blind loyalty that makes my high school buddy look sane after he took a misdemeanor charge for a girl who blocked him on every app before his court date. And Albert demands that Count Perdium throw Ghislain into chains the second he steps foot near the gates, completely unaware of what his young lord just conquered in the Timberland. Until Knight Captain Randolph bursts through the library doors completely out of breath, shouting for the council to drop everything and come down to the courtyard, leaving Count Perdium and his head advisors frozen in wide-eyed shock at the sudden announcement. As Ghislain walks up the castle steps in his long dark red coat, sword at his hip, returning victorious from the forest of death to claim the domain that is rightfully his. Stepping straight into the grand strategy chamber where the entire domain leadership is waiting to pull up his rap sheet, Ghislain doesn't even break a sweat taking his seat at the center of the table, meeting his father's icy glare with the exact unbothered posture of a man who knows he holds every single card in the room, casually dropping a deadpan, "I'm home, father," which instantly sets off Count Perdium, who wastes zero time reminding his son that he explicitly banned any unauthorized expeditions into the Timberland. And while Ghislain offers a polite little bow claiming it was a necessary risk, Treasurer Albert slams his hands on the wood like an enraged HOA president screaming about treason, followed immediately by Knight Captain Randolph yelling that an unvetted march could have drawn a monster horde straight to their front gates, only for Ghislain to hit him with a dry reality check pointing out that everybody is breathing and the territory is intact, leaving Albert utterly flabbergasted that a 14-year-old is talking back to domain elders with zero panic, while Randolph rubs his temples wondering if the kid thinks military protocol is a joke, before sliding a heavily sealed parchment across the table to see how Ghislain plans on talking his way out of a full-blown diplomatic disaster. Because the moment Ghislain recognizes the official wax seal of Count Rayfold, Randolph reveals that word of his little estate visit broke the internet in high society, explaining that extorting 20,000 gold out of Lady Amelia caused her father to completely blow his fuse, cutting off all financial aid and throwing the engagement in the trash. And as Ghislain scans the authentic decree, his brain instantly calculates the political trap behind the paper, realizing Count Rayfold is a greedy puppet who was easily manipulated, meaning Amelia Rayfold intentionally torched her own family's financial leverage just to isolate House Perdium, proving she will happily burn down her own bridge if it means trapping Ghislain in a corner, which renders his secret blackmail over her guild fronts useless in the eyes of this council, making him realize that if he had delayed his pioneer march by even a week, this political trap would have bound him hand and foot, while Albert and Randolph corner him like debt collectors, demanding he return that 20,000 gold immediately because that bag was supposed to run their entire night order for months. Only for Ghislain to look them dead in the eyes and drop the most disrespectfully casual line of the century, flatly announcing that he spent every single coin, sending Albert's blood pressure through the ceiling as the old man screams about wasting a fortune on a monster-infested death trap, while Ghislain just gives a deadpan "my bad" about the Rayfold situation, which pushes Randolph past his limit, lunging across the table to grab Ghislain by the collar and scream into his face, while Albert orders the guards to toss the young lord into a dark cell. Yet Ghislain doesn't even flinch in the man's grip, smoothly announcing that from now on, the council doesn't need Rayfold because they can get all their funding straight from his pocket. And before Administrator Homerin can even process the claim, Ghislain shouts for Belinda, right as the oak doors swing wide open to reveal his top tier, maid carrying a heavy wooden chest, setting the box down on the central table and popping the iron clasp, releasing an ethereal glare of pure azure light that washes over the entire room, unmasking a chest crammed to the brim with purest-grade runestones, freezing the entire domain council in absolute, paralyzed shock. As Albert stumbles backward with shaking hands, lifting a glowing crystal like he just touched a holy relic while demanding to know where this treasure came from. And the second Ghislain confirms they dug it right out of the forest of beasts, Albert tries to play smart by claiming one chest isn't enough to run a domain, only for Ghislaine to hit him with a razor-sharp smirk, leading the entire stunned council out to the lower courtyard, where a massive military convoy is parked with workers actively hauling literal tons of glowing manowar, showing wagon after wagon stacked to the sky with azure runestones alongside mountain piles of flame-resistant pyrus and hides, leaving the old advisors looking like their brains just short-circuited. While Randolph reads off the official inventory tally, confirming that this insane fortune is merely a tiny fraction of what remains sitting in their newly secured subterranean mine. And as Ghislaine stands before the fortress declaring this wealth is for the territory, Albert stares at his ledger with trembling eyes, realizing House Perdium's generational poverty was just deleted in a single afternoon, prompting Randolph to slap a friendly hand on the kid's shoulder, throwing out heavy praise for surviving the expedition and offering full support, only for Ghislaine to raise his fingers and cut him off mid-sentence, smoothly informing the room that his financial backing comes with non-negotiable terms, demanding the immediate release of Commander Scoven from the dungeon while ordering the timberland kept strictly off-limits to civilians to prevent dangerous rumors from spreading, which Albert nods along with as reasonable logic, right up until Ghislaine drops the real hammer, asserting that he will personally recruit, pay, and command all territorial security forces himself, instantly triggering an explosion of outrage across the table as the nobles realize he is openly building an autonomous private army inside their borders. With Albert sweating harder than a guy checking his bank balance at Denny's after promising to pay for the whole table, trying to lecture the kid about begging for forgiveness instead of making demands, only for Ghislaine to look down at him with a cold smile, casually reminding the treasurer that if petty council pride gets in the way of his operations, the entire financial pipeline closes, leaving the old man choked up in a cold sweat without a single comeback, as Ghislaine turns his back on the political clowns and walks out to join his real power structure, where Gillian, Kayer, and his veteran officers report that the runestone transport is secured, asking how he wants to handle the massive carcass of the blood python. And as Ghislaine issues precise orders to harvest every drop of venom, hide, and meat for high-grade crafting, Randolph snaps to attention, saluting like a fresh recruit who knows who the real boss is, while Count Perdium watches his 14-year-old son stand naturally among hardened, dark aura mercenaries, realizing internally that the boy has assembled an untouchable elite force, stepping forward to acknowledge the immense effort required to command such monsters, only for Ghislaine to humbly deflect the praise back to his men's loyalty, forcing the Count to close his eyes and sigh, officially letting this massive breach of orders slide with a stern warning that a second offense won't be forgiven. And as Ghislaine offers a respectful bow to his father's retreating figure, the weight of the old timeline washes over his mind, watching the Count walk back up toward the fortress, remembering how history remembered his father as the Northern Wolf who defended the frontier entirely alone, recalling the tragic reality of a lonely lord who carried an impoverished land on his back after losing his wife, his daughter, and enduring his son's past betrayal. Seeing the visual memory of his father's original fate, slumped over in arrow-riddled armor on a burning, forgotten battlefield without a single soul left to stand by his side, which snaps him back to the present clearing where Gillian and Kayer are celebrating having one major crisis checked off the list, asking if they are heading inside the castle, only for Belinda to march straight into his path with tears of pure distress in her eyes, grabbing his arm and begging him to rest after surviving the python's deadly venom, complaining about how much needle mana technique she had to burn just to flush the toxic acid out of his system, right as Ghislaine reaches out and gently rests his hand on her shoulder, whispering a soft please with an intensity so heavy that it instantly freezes the master-level maid in her tracks, forcing her to lower her hands in quiet submission. And as Ghislaine walks across the dusty staging ground with cold sweat dripping down his neck from the brutal recoil of unsealing his third core, his mind remains locked on the immediate strategic horizon, knowing that news of a massive runestone vein will spread across the kingdom like wildfire, drawing every royal vulture and conspirator straight to House Perdium's border, symbolized by the invisible, looming threat of continental powers hovering over their territory like a giant hand waiting to crush them before they can convert wealth into raw military strength. Which is why Ghislaine stands unbowed amidst the rising dust of his private encampment, resolving to scale his army to a tier so dominant that no noble faction will ever dare challenge his domain, as his loyal warband roars in absolute devotion, ready to follow their young lord into the next war and secure the ultimate future of House Perdium. A messenger dove cuts through the stained glass window of a dark circular chamber, carrying a sealed parchment straight toward the Shadow Throne, landing directly on the pale hand of the hooded figure, who immediately unties the scroll containing high-level regional intel, reading that House Perdium actually managed to clear a section of the lethal forest of beasts, triggering a directive from the top brass to engineer a false flag war with House Degard to wipe Perdium off the map. And as the throne figure stares at the letter with his glowing golden eye, contemplating the total destruction of Perdium, he realizes Duke Delphine's syndicate is about to install a brand new puppet lord over the territory, asking his Shadow Council how many operative assets they still have embedded inside Perdium, to which a senior retainer reveals they only have 2 retainers and a single knight remaining on the ground. So Desmond commands them to deploy those retainers straight into Degard territory, using the dead body of Degard's missing young lord as the ultimate fake pretext to force an immediate military invasion. And when he casually drops that Supreme Commander Victor is taking charge, his entire council panics, because pulling out their final boss card this early feels like a massive tactical overreach. Demanding to know why Duke Delphine's syndicate is suddenly abandoning all subtlety, only for Desmond to clarify that the runestone mine inside the Forest of Beasts changed the entire game. Ordering his subordinates to stop second-guessing the grand design and immediately prepare the war machine for full-scale mobilization. Revealing Count Desmond in his full noble attire, flared up in a dark purple aura as the primary regional antagonist orchestrating the whole conspiracy. Asking with a paranoid glint in his eye if anyone else has caught wind of this blueprint before everything drops. Meanwhile, over in a luxury estate, Lady Amelia Rayfold is having a full breakdown against her dark-armored retainer, screaming Ghislaine's name in pure venomous hatred. Crying about how Ghislaine took her 20,000 gold and turned it directly into an infinite money runestone mine, surviving her Wildcat hit squad and making her look like a total fool in front of her father. While her bodyguard just stands there stoically, waiting for the SSS tier baddie to stop crashing out and remember who she's supposed to be. Forcing Amelia to take a deep breath, pull herself together, and admit that letting her emotions hijack her judgment is pure amateur hour. Her red eyes flashing with cold malice as she tells her retainer that what's done is done, and it's time to shift from panic to cold tactical calculation. Leaning over her war map to explain that while House Perdium thinks they just secured a massive fortune, having raw or means nothing if you can't actually move it to a buyer. Calculating that Ghislaine only unearthed the mine 2 days ago, meaning he hasn't built a secure distribution network yet, and is wide open for a hit-and-run interception. Pointing straight to the Crimson Magic Tower on the map, knowing it's the top buyer in the northern region run by a 7th Circle Archmage. Ordering her Wildcat mercenaries to set up choke point ambushes along the main trade roads leading straight to the tower. Targeting the transport workers to choke off Perdium's cash flow while her officer double-checks why they aren't guarding the alternative Flame Magic Tower. Where Amelia flashes back to Ghislaine's pre-regression reputation as a greedy, money-obsessed idiot, knowing he'll automatically chase the highest payout at Crimson rather than the declining Flame Tower. Vowing with unyielding hatred that this time she will strip every single asset from Ghislaine before he can even touch a gold coin. Meanwhile back at Castle Perdium, the entire stone fortress stands quiet under the pale sky while its young lord lies unconscious. Heavily bandaged across his chest as his mind relives the terrifying final moments inside the blood python's stomach, where he was trapped inside the monster's organic maw, fighting for survival in a bath of lethal digestive fluids. Watching the apex predator release wave after wave of acidic venom designed to melt prey alive before reaching the throat. Using his 3rd core mana to burn off the liquid poison on contact, keeping his internal organs from instantly liquefying. But because the chemical reaction created a cloud of toxic fumes, his lungs were being scorched from the inside out. Knowing that if he passed out for even a second, his sister, his domain, and his entire future would burn on a battlefield just like his past life. So instead of trying to fight the poison, he made the unhinged gamble to forcibly drag every drop of venom straight into his mana cores. Using superhuman microcontrol to spin his 3 cores like a centrifuge, stripping the toxicity and turning the raw venom into high-density fuel, which triggers a massive internal mana eruption, converting a lethal poison into permanent structural power, and allowing Ghislaine to finally open his eyes back in the physical realm without his body collapsing. Ghislaine sits up in his bed feeling surprisingly refreshed, rubbing his head as he tries to process passing out right after getting his father's approval. When the bedroom door opens and his little sister Elena gasps in shock before lunging forward to throw her arms around his neck, telling him he was out cold for 2 full days straight while she looks up at him with pure relief. And before Ghislaine can even process the affection, Elena shoves him back onto the mattress and yells down the hallway for Belinda at the top of her lungs. Leaving Ghislaine sitting there realizing his younger 14-year-old body simply couldn't handle fighting an apex beast, overworking his cores, and tanking poison all at once. But as he steps out of bed and flexes his arm, he notices something unexpected. His physical recovery speed and resilience have shot through the roof. Feeling his total mana pool expand while a distinct blue aura hums across his skin, proving his mana property physically shifted. Realizing that assimilating the blood python's venom fundamentally mutated his core, an exploit he never even discovered during his decades as the Mercenary King. Which means if he can replicate this high-risk core overload method, his growth rate is going to skyrocket by dozens of times. Though he quickly puts on a clean shirt, knowing that securing buyers for the runestone mine is still the main priority before word spreads to rival domains. And just as he thinks about calling Gillian and Kayer to organize transport, a knock hits his door that he assumes is Belinda, only for the heavy wooden door to swing open, revealing Count Perdium himself in full blue plate armor alongside Belinda and Elena, with his father looking down at him in genuine relief, admitting he almost had a heart attack when his son randomly collapsed after the expedition. And as Ghislaine assures him that he's fine, the Northern Wolf lets out a quiet sigh, relieved that his reckless prodigy didn't die to python venom. While Belinda steps in to inspect his face with her master-level medical eyes, making sure his cores haven't taken permanent damage. Right as a blonde male wearing a fur-collared cloak steps into the doorway behind his father, looking directly at Ghislaine and asking if the young mastermind has a quick moment to hear out a formal request. Leaving Ghislaine staring back with sharp, analytical eyes, already calculating what this new variable means for House Perdium's expansion. Walking into the grand stone training hall behind his father, Ghislaine keeps his hand resting near his hilt. Realizing this is the first private one-on-one session they have ever had, since in his previous life, he constantly dodged the Count out of pure fear, making his father's polite apology for calling him an early feel almost surreal. As Count Perdium narrows his sharp blue eyes, maintaining a cold, unreadable silence, which immediately triggers a memory of what Gislin's mother told him back when he was a kid, recalling how she sat with him in a grassy field overlooking the valley, explaining that his father simply cannot express personal emotions, because he forces himself to stand as an unshakable pillar for his people, carrying every domain burden in total isolation. So as Gislin snaps back to reality, Count Perdium commands him to draw his blade, and Gislin tightens his grip, locking his focus onto his father, stepping into a combat stance across the stone circle with a quiet, respectful response. Before both men leap forward at high speed, clashing steel in midair as sparks fly across the training floor, forcing Gislin to pivot his boots on the stone flags to parry a heavy downward strike, and transition straight into a spinning counterattack, trading rapid aura arcs across the hall, until they separate, leaving Gislin staring at his sword, feeling the immense weight behind his father's style. A martial foundation forged to crush wild northern barbarians in brutal border wars, yet refined with enough control to shield every citizen under his rule without spilling unnecessary blood, leading straight into another explosive exchange where their blades lock in a shower of friction sparks, as Count Perdium presses the offensive, forcing Gislin to match his speed beat for beat, until both swordsmen reset their stances, breathing steadily across the stone courtyard. And Count Perdium lowers his guard slightly, giving his son genuine praise for how much his swordplay has evolved, which Gislin accepts with a humble nod, right before his father breaks down the technical flaws in his stance, warning him that putting too much pressure into blade clashes makes his tactical intent obvious to top-tier opponents, making Gislin realize that after a lifetime of surviving on raw battlefield instinct, receiving actual technical guidance is a massive advantage. So he bows his head in sincere gratitude, thanking his father for the lesson, only for Count Perdium's expression to harden as he admits he originally came here to thoroughly chew him out, explaining that breaking military protocol creates domain chaos regardless of how many runestones he brought back, but acknowledging that Gislin is no longer acting out of reckless ambition, but calculating for the entire county's future, telling him to embrace his duties as successor, leaving Gislin chewing on the heavy weight of that word, before quickly remembering his main objective and calling out to his father's retreating back, asking what the Count's original request was, while subtly testing the waters, by asking if the domain happens to have spare cash lying around, before we cut straight to the Forest of Beasts post, where Gislin strides into the base camp wearing his signature red coat, greeted by his heavily armored vanguard, as Kair grins like a maniac and the Cerberus mercenaries roar out a submissive greeting to their employer, prompting Gislin to apologize for his 2-day recovery delay, while Belinda keeps a watchful eye on his mana roads, before turning to Gillian to ask about his daughter Rachel's recovery from the plague, which brings the hardened veteran to emotional tears, thanking Gislin for giving his daughter her life back, right before Gislin calls Gillian, Kair, and Belinda into the command tent, dropping the vibe to serious business, briefing his inner circle on how he stopped Elena's assassination and prevented neighboring House Degard from starting a war, explaining how he found the Degard heir's corpse and discovered shadow agents actively surrounding Castle Perdium, leaving Belinda visibly stressed as Gislin confirms they are running out of time before a full-scale invasion strikes, which prompts Gillian to suggest immediately warning Count Perdium and the domain vassals about the incoming threat, only for Gislin to shoot down the idea, pointing out that since Elena's bodyguards turned traitor, corrupt vassals could easily leak their plans, meaning their military preparations must remain strictly off the books if they want to survive this multi-front war. And Kair just smirks, admitting that following this teenager into lethal battlefields is the most fun he's had in years, while Gillian places his hand on his chest, pledging his axe and life to Gislin until the very end. And Belinda puffs out her chest, aggressively declaring that protecting her young lord is her personal responsibility, as Gislin maps out the real puppet masters behind the curtain, Duke Delphine, Count Desmond, and his deceitful ex-fiancée Amelia, announcing that their next move is to bypass standard trade routes and transport their runestones to the Flame Magic Tower, which makes Belinda pause in confusion, asking why they aren't going to the closer Crimson Magic Tower for top market rates. Allowing Gillian to clock the genius play, Amelia deployed her wildcats to ambush the Crimson routes, so taking the Flame route completely invalidates her trap. But Gislin looks straight ahead, revealing the real reason for targeting the Flame Magic Tower comes down to one person, as the scene shifts to the magnificent, Gothic spire of the Flame Magic Tower reaching into the sky, where inside a massive library stacked ceiling-high with ancient grimoires, a solitary dark-haired girl sits on the floor, holding a staff. And as this SSS-tier purple-eyed waifu looks up, half the audience just hit pause, waiting to see how Gislin recruits her.